Hi guys. Tonight, we walk into the kind of cold that bites through time itself. You're standing on the edge of a Viking winter camp snow, drifted high against pine trunks, the air sharp enough to sting the back of your throat. Torches flicker orange across a scatter of low tents and half-buried huts, their hides glazed with frost like sugared fruit. The wind sighs through gaps in the wood, humming a tune older than memory. You can almost feel it in your ribs, a reminder that you probably wouldn't survive this kind of night without the tricks those warriors knew. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and the local time down below. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights and step closer to the fire. You crouch among them, these broad-shouldered wanderers wrapped in layers of wool and fur, their beards rimed white, breath curling like smoke signals. The fire crackles low, fed by pine resin and chunks of driftwood scavenged from frozen shores. Every sound carries the pop of sap, the faint chime of ice shifting on the river nearby. You notice that nobody truly speaks above a murmur. Words, like heat, are rationed. A tall man pokes at the embers, his face carved in amber light. He's not just a warrior. Tonight he's also an engineer of survival. His people call this camp Vetrasetra winter sitting, and the art of not freezing is as prized as the swing of a sword. Historians still argue whether Viking winter camps were mainly military outposts or community settlements where families joined the warriors. Either way, the choreography of warmth was deliberate. You glance around. The shelters form a half-circle facing the windbreak, a wall of sleds, shields, and stacked logs. Inside, hides stretch over wooden frames, creating pockets of air that trap heat like primitive insulation. It's the same principle as your puffer jacket, centuries early, a mainstream historical fact. Excavations at Trelleborg and Birka show compact huts with turf-lined walls, built partly below ground to use the Earth's steady temperature. Quirky detail? Some evidence suggests they smeared fish oil on outer hides to waterproof them, an ancient, smelly version of weatherproofing spray. The smell hits you, wood smoke mixed with something animal, maybe tallow lamps burning seal fat. It's not pleasant, but it's home to them. You can almost taste the salt and soot clinging to the air. A woman, one of the camp followers, or perhaps a shield maiden, feeds the fire with kindling she's kept under her cloak all day. You realize survival here depends on hundreds of tiny decisions made before sundown. Where to pitch the tent, how to angle the door flap away from wind, how to share warmth without losing dignity. You shift your weight, and the snow squeaks underfoot. Overhead, the aurora drifts like green silk, ghost-like playing on helms and tent ropes. Someone coughs. Another mutters a short prayer to Thor for steady weather. The night answers with silence. You notice how even silence has texture, the hum of distant ice, the faint rasp of wool against wool as men settle deeper into furs. The leader gestures toward the nearest shelter. You duck inside. Instantly, the air changes. It's still cold, yes, but softer, dense with breath and life. 6 men share this space, lying head to toe to conserve heat. Their boots rest near the entrance, turned soles up to dry by the warmth of bodies rather than open flame. Steam curls from them faintly. Beneath the sleeping forms, spruce branches form a springy mat. On top, layers of straw, then sheepskin, then cloaks. Each layer matters. Lose one, and frost creeps in like a thief. You trace the outline of a small bronze amulet hanging near the doorway, a Thor's hammer, meant to guard sleepers from trolls and spirits said to stalk the northern dark. Folklore wasn't decoration. It was insulation for the mind. Fear could chill faster than any wind. One warrior shifts, muttering in half-sleep. His hand brushes the hilt of his sea-axe knife. Even in slumber, he's alert. You realize that danger wasn't only the cold. Rival bands, wolves, or simply a collapsing roof of snow could end the night abruptly. That's why watchmen remain outside, pacing slow circles around the fires. You hear their boots crunch rhythmically, a heartbeat for the camp. A soft snore joins the crackle of fire. You think about the strange intimacy of this life, the way warriors shared not just raids and songs but the heat of their own skin. They called themselves felag, partners, literally fellows in wealth. But in winter they were fellows in warmth too. The old sagas rarely mention sleeping, as though admitting fatigue would tarnish heroism. Yet archaeologists remind us that even the fiercest warrior needed 8 hours of relative warmth, or his fingers would stiffen by dawn. You lean back, feeling the slow rhythm of breathing around you. 6 men exhaling fog that becomes its own kind of blanket. Condensation beads on the tent walls, freezing, thawing, freezing again, in a cycle that mirrors the heartbeat of the season. Outside, snow hisses off the fire as sparks drift towards stars. You think about the contrast, the violence of raids and the tenderness required to keep each other alive through such nights. A whisper of paradox threads through the camp, how men who could split skulls with axes also learned to tuck straw gently under a comrade's head so he wouldn't wake with frost-numbed ears. Your eyelids grow heavy from the warmth of the scene, but the story continues beyond this first night. There are tricks to come, rituals of heat and breath, beds raised from the earth, dogs curled like fur-covered stones. But for now, linger here in the half-dark, where the only sound is the sigh of sleeping Vikings and the quiet pride of surviving another frozen dawn. The fire's glow fades to a deep amber as you step outside, breath rising in plumes that catch the starlight. Around you, the camp exhales a slow rhythm of life. You can smell wood smoke and hear the faint creak of snow shifting under its own weight. This is the hour when warmth is currency, and every wisp of breath counts. You crouch beside a warrior tending one of the smaller hearths near the edge of camp. He moves with the calm precision of someone who has done this 100 times. He lifts a small iron tool and stirs the ash. A dull glow blooms beneath, hidden embers nursing the heat that kept men alive. It's a fragile balance. Too much air and the fire roars, devouring wood. Too little, and it dies, leaving only cold shame. You realize this dance of breath and smoke is the camp's true language. Fire is not just a source of heat, it is a living presence, a companion. Every Viking learned how to read it. The crackle of dry pine meant safety. The hiss of wet bark meant danger. The wrong kind of smoke could suffocate a tent before dawn. Historians still argue whether Viking fires were always central hearths or sometimes small clay stoves placed in corners for safety. Excavations at Hedeby suggest both, depending on the size of the dwelling. The air inside those shelters was heavy with moisture, so managing breath mattered as much as feeding flames. Imagine 6 men exhaling into a low-roofed space. The carbon from their breath could build up, turning the air sour, so they built smoke holes, small vents near the top of hides, allowing fire and lungs to share their exhaustion with the sky. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Some say they even judged the weather by the way smoke drifted out. If it clung low, a storm was coming. If it rose clear, the night might stay merciful. A quirky tidbit. A few sagas mention warriors wrapping damp cloths over their mouths while sleeping close to a fire, claiming it kept their breath moist and reduced coughing. Whether that was early respiratory wisdom or just superstition, nobody can say for sure. You sit close, watching sparks leap like orange insects. The warrior beside you mutters something about feeding the fire as you feed yourself. He breaks a piece of bread, warms it on a flat stone, and smiles faintly. You realize that for these men, tending flame is almost spiritual. The Norse word for home, heimer, carried both physical and emotional weight, and fire sat at its heart. Now your eyes sting from the smoke. You blink, and it blurs into something almost dreamlike. You imagine the firelight painting the tents gold, the way it must have looked through eyes weary from battle or travel. The orange pulse of embers acts as both a beacon and a lullaby. The camp breathes in time with it. When you step inside another shelter, the air is warmer. A small stone hearth glows in the center, ringed with blackened pots and curved shields resting against the walls. Someone has arranged birch bark to reflect heat back into the room, an early attempt at energy efficiency. It's clever, almost scientific. You touch the bark. It's hot, but not charred. The Vikings didn't just survive the cold, they engineered around it. Still, nothing could make the winter easy. The mix of smoke and breath turned the air damp. Condensation froze into delicate crystals on roof poles. Every dawn, someone scraped them off so they wouldn't drip and soak the bedding when the fire rose again. The cycle repeated every day, a quiet ritual of maintenance. You listen to the fire sigh as it shifts. The wood smells faintly of resin and salt from the sea. That's because much of it drifted ashore, seasoned by brine. It burns slower, steadier, ideal for long nights. One of the younger warriors tells you that his father taught him to lay logs in alternating directions, crossing like a woven mat. It makes the fire last until morning, leaving a deep red bed of coals that can be coaxed to life again with a single breath. And that breath yours, theirs, everyone's becomes part of the warmth. You realize the science beneath the simplicity. In these closed shelters, every person becomes a furnace, each exhalation adding humidity and heat to the air. It is an invisible network of survival, powered by lungs and trust. There's something mesmerizing about the rhythm. The fire exhales, the people inhale, the walls sweat, freeze, and sweat again. You begin to understand why they called it a winter sitting instead of merely camping. It was an act of endurance that bordered on ceremony. One man pulls a piece of glowing coal from the hearth using iron tongs and places it in a small clay pot filled with sand. It's a traveling ember, a kind of ancient battery. In the morning, it will light another fire without flint. It's a simple yet brilliant technology, carried from camp to camp, one ember feeding another like a chain of shared warmth across the north. Historians still debate whether these portable firepots were common or ceremonial. Some suggest they were tied to worship of hearth deities, others that they were just practical fire starters. Either way, the image lingers, a people so attuned to flame that they refuse to let it die, even for a single night. You lie back, the smoke curling toward the vent like a prayer. The sound of crackling wood settles into your pulse. You can almost imagine the conversation of breath between you and the fire. Both of you living, both of you feeding, both of you waiting for morning. Outside, snow falls softly, but inside, the world glows red. You exhale, and your breath joins theirs, a small act of survival in a long, frozen story. You wake to a dull grey light seeping through the hide walls. The fire has burned down to faint coals, their glow like sleepy eyes under ash. The air smells of wool, sweat, and smoke. Outside, someone is shaking snow from the roof. It lands in heavy thumps, muffled by the firs overhead. Your breath drifts in the cold morning, visible even inside. You pull your cloak tighter and begin to notice what keeps these men alive when the world outside could kill in minutes. Clothing is their real armor against the night. Every piece has a purpose, and nothing is wasted. You reach for a tunic of thick wool, scratchy but warm, and understand why wool was the lifeblood of the North. It can hold warmth even when damp, a miracle fabric spun from the patience of sheep grazing on icy hills. Historians still argue whether the Vikings imported finer wools from the British Isles or perfected their own breed of hardy northern sheep. Either way, the result is the same: insulation that outlasts weather and war. They layer carefully. First comes the linen undertunic, light but essential, wicking away sweat before it freezes. Then the wool tunic, its weave dense as felt. Over that, a cloak fastened by a brooch, usually fur-lined along the edges where frost bites hardest. You notice that the edges of every garment are reinforced with narrow strips of cloth or leather. It keeps them from fraying, but it also seals warmth in. A warrior near you is mending his hood. He stitches calmly, his fingers clumsy with cold but precise from habit. The hood, called a coif, fits snugly under a fur hat. It covers the neck and shoulders, overlapping the cloak so no skin is exposed to the wind. His mittens hang on a cord around his neck, ready to pull on when he steps outside. A quirky detail catches your attention. Some Vikings rubbed their clothing with animal fat or even fish oil to make it windproof. It smelled terrible, but the thin, greasy layer turned away snow and damp. You imagine that particular aroma spreading through a crowded tent at night. Perhaps that is why so many sagas praise the virtues of strong-smelling smoke. It masked everything else. You run your fingers over a pair of wool leggings lying nearby. They are thick as carpet, bound to the legs with soft leather strips called windings. This binding not only kept the fabric tight, but also served as a kind of gentle compression to improve circulation in freezing temperatures. Modern mountaineers would recognize the idea instantly. The Vikings discovered it through experience. The question of footwear lingers. How did they protect their feet when snow seeped through everything? The answer lies in layers again. Linen socks, then wool, then soft leather shoes stuffed with dried grass. Yes, grass. Dried sedge acted as insulation, trapping air just like modern thermal padding. Each night they would pull the grass out, dry it by the fire, and replace it before sleep. Simple, effective, endlessly renewable. You can almost hear the soft rustle as a warrior shakes out handfuls of clean sedge, stuffing it into his boots before wrapping his feet. It is an oddly tender sound amid all the clatter of weapons. There is an art to dressing for sleep too. Nobody strips completely, not in this kind of cold. Instead, they loosen belts, pull hoods low, and curl up inside their cloaks. The idea is to trap the air their bodies have already warmed. Sometimes 2 or 3 men share one large cloak, fastening the edges together with brooches or pins to form a cocoon. Privacy means nothing when survival demands company. Historians still debate whether Viking cloaks were always rectangular or semicircular. Some depictions show one side shorter, allowing a freer sword arm, but for sleeping, the longer cut works best, folding over the head like a hood. You can imagine lying there, hearing the fabric stiffen as frost forms along the edge, feeling the warmth trapped close to your chest. The women in camp understand clothing better than anyone. You notice one sitting by the light, combing out sheep's wool. She hums softly as she twists the fibers into thread using a spindle. The movement is hypnotic. Each spin tightens the strand, turning fluff into strength. That strength becomes warmth. It is a kind of alchemy, transforming raw nature into comfort. A curious fact surfaces in your mind. Fragments of Viking clothing found in graves still show traces of rich dyes. Reds from madder root, yellows from birch leaves, deep blues from woad. Even in winter they loved colour. Imagine how those cloaks must have looked by firelight, glimmering like jewels against the snow. It makes you think warmth is not only a physical thing but a psychological one. The camp stirs fully now. Men stretch and grunt, rolling their shoulders beneath layers of wool. You catch glimpses of different furs: reindeer, bear, wolf, each chosen for its particular warmth and texture. They trade stories about which keeps the heat best, as though comparing battle scars. One swears by wolfskin because it sheds snow easily. Another praises sheepskin for its softness. You pull your own borrowed cloak tighter and notice the smell of lanolin, the natural oil in wool. It's faint but comforting, a scent of safety. You understand now why modern historians call Viking textiles technologies of survival. Every thread, every layer, every stitch was a deliberate answer to the cold. Outside, snow continues to fall in slow, silent sheets. A few men step out to relieve themselves, their boots crunching on the crusted ground. Steam rises from where they stand. They laugh about it, a moment of crude humor that cuts the tension. Laughter, like wool, is another kind of insulation. You look back inside. The fires are being coaxed awake again, sparks leaping into the chill. Someone tosses in pine needles, filling the air with a sharp, clean scent. It's the smell of morning after survival. You can almost feel the energy returning, like warmth rediscovering your limbs. And as you sit there, wrapped in ancient fabric and breath, you realize something simple but profound. The Vikings did not just endure winter, they dressed themselves in defiance of it. Each stitch was a small rebellion, each layer a promise to see another sunrise. You are sitting now at the heart of the camp, the air thick with the smell of pine smoke and damp wool. The night has settled in again, and the cold outside is so sharp it feels like glass. Inside, though, there is movement, low murmurs, and the steady sound of bodies shifting closer together. You begin to understand the Viking secret that rarely makes it into the sagas. Survival depended not on solitude, but on shared warmth. They sleep close, sometimes in lines, sometimes in huddled clusters. The Norse word felag meant partnership or fellowship, but in winter camps, it also meant shared body heat. Imagine half a dozen men lying shoulder to shoulder, their cloaks overlapping, their breaths mingling in clouds that fog the air above them. It is practical and intimate in a way that feels both ancient and human. Archaeological evidence from sites like Hedeby and Kaupang suggests that longhouses were designed with raised sleeping benches running along the walls. These benches were wide enough for several people to lie side by side. They were covered with hay, moss, or sheepskins, creating communal beds that trapped warmth. The same layout appears in Icelandic farmsteads centuries later, proof that the idea worked so well it became a cultural habit. An unexpected detail emerges from Norse law codes. There were rules about where individuals slept within the hall. Warriors of higher rank or guests of honor often slept toward the center, closer to the hearth, while lower-ranking fighters or servants took the outer spots where the cold seeped through the wall planks. Warmth was hierarchy. The closer you were to the fire, the more your value was acknowledged. You watch as one of the men adjusts his position. Without a word, others shift with him, keeping the wall of bodies unbroken. It is an instinct older than speech, like geese forming a line in flight. You can feel the rhythm of their breath, the quiet cooperation that keeps them alive. What fascinates researchers today is how such closeness affected Viking social bonds. Sleeping shoulder to shoulder for weeks or months must have built a kind of trust that no oath could match. Some historians suggest that the legendary loyalty among warriors, the brotherhood sung about in later poems, was forged as much in these nights of shared exhaustion as on any battlefield. Others think it simply made practical sense. Staying warm outweighed personal space. One lesser-known discovery from burial sites in Denmark shows that bedding materials were sometimes mixed with crushed juniper or heather. The scent kept fleas and lice at bay, and the oils from the plants offered mild antiseptic properties. Picture that fragrance rising from the bedding, woody, clean, a faint whisper of summer preserved in the middle of a frozen landscape. You notice how they wrap themselves. Each person keeps their cloak tight around the body but leaves enough overlap with the next. Between them, the air stays warmer than the icy drafts sneaking through the roof beams. A small gap opens, and cold slips in like a ghost. Someone mutters, half asleep, and a hand pulls the furs tighter, balance restored. There are small rituals before sleep. A man scratches runes into the dirt near the doorway, invoking Thor's protection. Another whispers something to the fire, a small thank you for surviving one more day. You realize that these gestures are not superstition alone. They create a rhythm of calm, a way to quiet fear before surrendering to rest. Curiously enough, sagas that mention sleeping arrangements often do so in moments of tension. In Egil's saga, a man is murdered in his bed, the attack made possible because so many shared the same space. Scholars point out that while communal sleeping built unity, it also demanded vigilance. Even in slumber, weapons were kept within reach, and trust had limits. You lie down among them for a moment, listening to the chorus of breathing. The smell of smoke clings to the furs. The air feels heavy but strangely safe. The warmth of the man beside you seeps into your side, the same way yours seeps into his. It is not comfort as you know it, but it is survival in its truest form. Some researchers have experimented with reconstructing these sleeping setups in modern conditions. In one experiment, 6 volunteers lay together under sheepskins inside a turf hut at -10 degrees Celsius. Their combined body heat raised the temperature under the covers to nearly 20 degrees within an hour. The human furnace works remarkably well when multiplied. You think about that as you watch frost forming on the inside of the roof. It sparkles in the dim firelight like a scattering of tiny stars. The sound of someone shifting in sleep is followed by a sigh, then silence again. Outside, the wind keens through the trees, frustrated at being shut out. In this moment, you understand why Viking poetry so often speaks of kinship as warmth and betrayal as cold. Those were not just metaphors, they were literal truths. To turn against a comrade in winter was to steal his heat, to doom him to freezing. You close your eyes. The heartbeat of the camp slows, syncing with your own. It feels timeless. This act of huddling against the cold, this exchange of breath and warmth and quiet faith. When morning comes, they will rise again, shake the frost from their cloaks, and face another day of endurance. But for now, they sleep, a single living organism pulsing softly against the vast, frozen dark. You wake in the half-light before dawn. The cold has crept back in, thin and sly, curling around ankles and fingertips. Outside, the first grey shimmer of morning touches the snow. The fire has dwindled to a few glowing coals, barely holding on. Beside you, someone stirs, muttering softly. Then a shape moves near the tent flap, and for a heartbeat, you think it's another warrior. But the sound that follows is a low snuffle, the kind of sound that doesn't belong to a man. A dog pushes its head through the flap, shakes snow from its fur, and crawls inside. Its body is solid heat, steaming faintly in the cold air. The nearest sleeper grunts and lifts his cloak so the animal can wedge itself between them. Instantly, the small pocket of warmth spreads. The Vikings understood this simple truth long before science could name it. A warm animal could mean the difference between life and death. Across the camp, you notice more of them. Dogs curled like commas near their masters. A shaggy goat tethered close to a wall where it gives off a gentle, grassy smell. Even a small piglet wrapped in a spare cloak. The scene is oddly tender, a patchwork of fur and breath and human improvisation. Excavations at Borg in Lofoten have revealed bones of dogs and livestock within the living quarters, suggesting that animals shared the same shelter during deep winter. It wasn't sentimentality but strategy. Each creature added warmth, manure for fuel, and a reminder of the domestic world that kept chaos at bay. One striking detail found in Norse household remains is the presence of low wooden partitions dividing people and animals. Not by walls, but by woven hurdles of willow. These barriers allowed heat and sound to travel freely. Imagine lying half awake, listening to the rhythmic chewing of a cow or the soft thud of a dog's tail against the ground. Life itself moving around you, reassuring and real. You scratch the dog's head. Its fur is coarse but warm, smelling faintly of smoke and snow. It yawns and curls closer. The Vikings bred several types of dogs, from large, wolfish guard dogs to smaller herding breeds. Some were companions in battle, others were hunters. All were companions in the cold. A curious note from early Norse poetry mentions warriors calling their dogs fire sleepers. The phrase has a double meaning: dogs that slept near the hearth, and dogs whose warmth glowed like flame. It is a poetic glimpse into how deeply they valued the comfort of an animal's body beside their own. Not all the animals were so friendly. Sheep and goats could be restless, their hooves clattering on the floorboards during the night. There are accounts in later Icelandic farm records describing people throwing bits of straw to calm them, or even singing softly, half lullaby, half command. One can almost hear it now, a low hum blending with the wind outside. Some researchers believe that keeping animals nearby also served as a primitive alarm system. A restless dog might sense movement beyond the camp before any human could. In a world where raiders or wolves might approach in darkness, Those few seconds of warning could save lives. You think about that as you watch the dog lift its head suddenly, ears twitching. The night outside has its own voice. The trees creak, snow slides from branches, a far-off owl hoots. Then, nothing. The dog lowers its head again, satisfied. You realize how finely tuned the partnership between man and beast had become. It was not pet ownership. It was alliance. Another man rolls over and grins sleepily at you. He gestures at the dog and mutters that even Odin had his wolves to keep him company. The gods themselves, in Norse belief, were surrounded by animals. Freya with her cats, Thor with his goats, and Odin with his ravens. Perhaps, you think, these stories were not just symbols of power but reflections of everyday life in the north, where people and animals survived only by sharing the same breath. There's an earthy smell now, the mingling of hide, fur, and smoke. It would seem unpleasant to you, but to them it is comfort, the scent of living warmth. You picture the camp from above, each tent a small island of heat in a sea of white. Inside every one, the same quiet choreography. Men, women, dogs, maybe a lamb, all tangled in a shared dream of endurance. A small boy, no more than 10, crawls from under a blanket of pelts. He strokes the dog's ears before reaching for a bowl of cold stew. He feeds it a scrap of meat and smiles. Even the youngest understand the exchange. Warmth for warmth, loyalty for life. Modern ethnographers studying Arctic herders have noted similar practices lasting into recent centuries. The principle is timeless. The closer you are to another living thing, the longer both of you endure. The Vikings, pragmatic to their core, made that a daily reality. As the morning brightens, the camp comes alive. Dogs stretch, goats bleat, humans groan and roll from their bedding. Breath hangs in the air like mist. Someone feeds the fire a handful of birch bark, and the flame leaps high, painting every face in orange. You stand at the doorway, watching as light crawls across the snow. The world feels newly made. The animals move first, shaking frost from their coats, ready to scavenge what little grass lies beneath the crusted snow. The people follow, stamping their boots, wrapping furs tighter. There is no sharp line here between human and animal. There is only the shared struggle to stay warm. It's a lesson you can almost feel in your bones. Survival is never solitary. Inside the tent, the dog settles back into the hay, sighing like an old man, its eyes close, content. You smile, realizing that for all their ferocity, the Vikings survived the Arctic nights with gentleness too. They trusted warmth in all its forms, even the kind that wagged its tail. The day brightens slowly, the kind of pale northern light that never truly burns away the chill. You walk across the camp, your boots crunching on frost. The warriors are busy gathering more pine branches, chopping logs, and shaking snow from their shelters. The wind slices across the open field, sharp as a blade. You realize again how little stands between comfort and cold. Inside the shelters, the real secret of survival is built into the ground itself. You step into one of the huts and notice something different about the floor. It is not bare earth, nor is it simply covered in straw. Instead, it is layered carefully, like a recipe for warmth. First, a base of logs laid across shallow trenches. On top of that, a bed of dried moss, then thick mats of hay, and finally animal hides. This design lifts the sleeper above the frozen soil, creating a cushion of trapped air that keeps heat from bleeding away. Archaeological excavations at Jarlshof in the Shetland Islands have revealed similar constructions, where raised sleeping platforms of timber or stone lined with moss were found alongside hearth remains. It suggests that even on remote outposts, Vikings carried with them an understanding of thermal design. Some researchers think these techniques were learned from the Sami people, who lived further north and mastered the art of insulating themselves from permafrost. You kneel and press your palm to the moss. It feels soft, faintly springy, and carries the scent of forest floor. You imagine them gathering it during warmer months, drying it in the sun, then storing it in sacks until winter. Every handful was a promise of comfort for nights like this. The moss absorbed sweat and moisture too, keeping the bedding dry. They would replace it often, adding new layers as the bottom ones became packed or frozen. Curiously, traces of juniper and fern have been found mixed into bedding layers at several Viking sites. Botanists note that both plants release natural oils that repel insects and fungi. It is practical and surprisingly sophisticated, an early form of hygiene built into the architecture of sleep. One of the older warriors motions to you, pointing at the walls. They are half buried in the earth, with turf piled high outside for insulation. The air inside feels thicker, more stable, almost like a cellar. You realize the floor, though rough, forms part of a complete thermal system. Warm air from the hearth rises, circulates through the room, and the walls trap it. Even the low ceiling plays its part, forcing heat to stay near the people lying close to the ground. It is not elegant, but it is genius in its simplicity. Some modern historians describe Viking winter shelters as reverse ships because they were built like inverted hulls, curved frames, tight planking, layers of moss instead of pitch. The comparison feels apartment. These were sailors of both sea and land, and they treated their huts as vessels navigating an ocean of cold. A few of the men are repairing a sleeping bench that cracked overnight. They use wooden pegs instead of nails, tapping them gently with the handle of an axe. Their movements are slow but deliberate, conserving energy. Every gesture in this camp is economy in motion. Nothing wasted, nothing unnecessary. You watch as they lay down new bedding, first the moss, then handfuls of hay that smell faintly sweet, then a reindeer hide with the fur turned inward. The texture is thick and plush, warm even to the touch. A young man pats the hide proudly, explaining that the air trapped inside the hollow reindeer hairs keeps the body insulated. Scientists today confirm the same principle. Reindeer fur is among the most effective natural insulators on Earth. As dusk begins to gather again, they prepare for another long night. The benches are covered, the fire stoked, and the air thickens with anticipation of rest. You can almost sense a rhythm to it now, a pattern older than memory. Each evening they rebuild warmth as though it were a fortress. Some historians have speculated that these communal benches also influenced Viking social structure. The closer ones slept to the hearth or to the leader, the higher ones standing in the group. The outer benches were for new recruits or servants. Archaeological mapping of charred floors sometimes reveals this hierarchy in the soot itself, darker where people slept closer to the fire, lighter at the edges where the cold crept in. A peculiar observation made by experimental archaeologists is that the moss flooring, once warmed, continues to emit heat for hours, acting almost like insulation in a thermos. When they recreated a Viking-style sleeping platform, they found that even after the fire went out, the temperature under the bedding stayed nearly 10 degrees warmer than the air above. You imagine those quiet hours before dawn, when only the faintest glow of embers remains, and yet the sleepers stay safe in their cocoon of warmth. You settle yourself on one of the benches. The wood gives slightly beneath you, creaking softly. You can feel the subtle lift from the ground, the dry resilience of the moss beneath the hides. It is surprisingly comfortable, not luxurious but steady, like the heartbeat of the earth itself lending its warmth. The old warrior who showed you around leans back against the wall, his beard rimed with frost, and grins. He mutters something that translates roughly to, "The ground can eat the cold before it eats you." You nod, realizing there is a kind of poetry hidden in that pragmatism. Outside, snow begins to fall again, whispering against the roof. The firelight flickers across the low ceiling, catching the gleam of the warrior's axe propped nearby. Around you, others begin to lie down, adjusting cloaks, pulling furs tight. The air fills with slow breathing and the faint rustle of straw. You lie back and stare at the roof, feeling the layers beneath you cradle the body. It is the opposite of luxury, yet it holds something deeper, the quiet dignity of endurance. Every plank, every handful of moss, Every hide is part of a conversation with the land. The Vikings did not conquer winter. They negotiated with it. As sleep creeps in, you think of all the feet that have walked across this same frozen soil, all the lives that found warmth just a few inches above the cold ground. The fire hums, the moss sighs, and for a moment, the earth itself feels alive beneath you, holding you close in its patient, icy embrace. Night falls again, quiet and complete. The camp glows faintly under a sky that looks carved from steel. The air is so clear you can almost taste it, sharp and dry like ground quartz. Inside the huts, the fire is being coaxed back to life. Every spark feels like a small victory. You kneel beside one of the warriors and watch the delicate work of maintaining flame through the long Arctic dark. The hearth is a shallow pit ringed by stones darkened from years of smoke. A thin layer of ash lines the bottom, soft as powder. The warrior carefully lifts a chunk of glowing coal from last night's fire and sets it at the center. He sprinkles dry moss around it, blows gently, and waits. A faint red bloom spreads, then a tongue of light. The flame catches, stretches, and grows. A moment later, warmth ripples through the room. It looks easy, but this is the art that kept entire communities alive. If the fire went out, relighting it from flint and steel in freezing air could take precious time and energy. Many Viking camps kept coals buried in ash all night, insulated against the wind. In the morning, the ashes were stirred and fed with pine needles or birch bark to wake the fire again. Archaeological traces of these sleeping fires have been found in longhouse ruins in Norway, the ash layers showing the rhythm of daily rekindling. A curious experiment by modern reenactors confirmed what the ancients already knew. If a coal is buried in fine ash, it can stay warm for nearly 12 hours, smouldering unseen like the heartbeat of the camp. You picture that faint glow in the dark, a pulse of life that never fully dies. Around the hearth, the walls are stained black. Soot clings to the beams and hides, a reminder that fire is both friend and danger. Too much smoke, and a hut can choke its inhabitants. Too little, and the cold kills instead. You realize that managing fire inside such tight spaces required a craftsman's touch. The structure of the hearth is ingenious. Some are built with a hollow stone in the center to channel air beneath the flame, feeding it slowly. Others have shallow trenches leading outward, letting smoke drift away while drawing in fresh air. The Vikings were not guessing, they were engineering. Fragments of iron grates and vents found in settlements like Lens or Meadows in Newfoundland suggest that these techniques traveled across oceans with them. You lean closer and feel the warmth brushing your face. The fire speaks softly in pops and sighs. One man tosses a handful of dried seaweed onto it, releasing a salty crackle and a strange, pleasant odor. He grins when he sees your expression and explains that seaweed burns hot and clean, a trick learned from coastal living. You file that away in your mind, one of those small secrets that make survival seem almost elegant. What fascinates historians is how the Vikings balanced heat and safety. Some reconstructions show that smoke holes were placed not at the top, but along the leeward side of the roof, so the wind could pull the smoke outward like a slow breath. A few scholars think this technique came from observation of animal burrows and how steam escapes through side vents in snow. However it began, it worked. The fire becomes the center of every night. Around it, men eat, talk, mend their boots, polish weapons, and finally fall asleep to its rhythm. It is the camp's heart, steady and glowing. Children drift to sleep, watching the embers fade. Old men stare into it as though reading omens. The sound of crackling wood replaces the ticking of clocks in this world. One small but charming detail recorded in an Icelandic household saga describes people throwing fish bones into the fire to predict weather. If the bones cracked sharply, it meant frost. If they hissed softly, rain. It is part superstition, part science, an old habit of listening closely to the language of flame. You stretch your hands toward the fire. The heat seeps through your gloves, spreading up your arms until your fingertips tingle. The smell of burning pine sap fills the room, sweet and smoky. You realize that warmth here is not constant. It is earned every few hours. Someone must always tend the fire, feed it, stir it, guard it. There is no automation in this world, only vigilance. As night deepens, you notice how the firelight paints everyone's faces in gold. Lines soften, fatigue dissolves, and even the hardest warrior looks almost gentle in that glow. Stories begin to rise from the circle, low voices sharing memories of home, of fields green under summer sun, of wives and children far away. The fire listens to them all, patient and flickering. Modern archaeologists have pointed out that Viking hearths were often lined with clay mixed with crushed shells. The mixture not only resisted heat but also reflected it, amplifying the warmth in a small space. You can almost feel that cleverness under your feet, a thousand-year-old understanding of thermodynamics before the term even existed. The wind outside moans through the pines. Sparks rise through the vent hole, swirling into the night like fleeting stars. For a moment, the camp feels suspended between two worlds, the burning life inside and the endless frost beyond. You lie back on your bedding, the fire's glow pulsing against the roof beams. Sleep comes slowly, shaped by the rhythm of crackling wood. You understand now that for the Vikings, flame was not merely a tool but a companion, a creature of warmth and breath that had to be fed, soothed, and never forgotten. The last thing you hear before sleep claims you is the soft murmur of someone whispering a blessing to the fire, thanking it for its light. The ember flares in answer, and darkness folds gently around you like fur. By the next evening, the wind sharpens, dragging sheets of snow across the camp like white sails. The flames inside the shelters burn low, protected under layers of hide and turf. You push aside a flap and step inside one of the tents. Instantly, the noise of the storm softens, and the air thickens with the scent of wool, smoke, and animal fat. This space, rough and dark, is an invention born of necessity and experience, the Viking tent that breathes. It takes your eyes a moment to adjust. The walls curve inward slightly, made from overlapping animal hides stretched over wooden poles. The floor is a patchwork of moss, straw, and leather. You run a hand along the hide and feel where it has been treated with a layer of waxy fat to keep moisture out. Drops of melting snow roll off it instead of soaking through. It feels alive, responsive to weather, not fixed or fragile like a house. Archaeological finds at Osberg and Gokstad have revealed the remnants of wooden tent frames stored inside burial ships. These collapsible structures show how portable the Viking world could be. Warriors traveling for months needed homes that folded like sails yet held warmth like earth. Modern experiments rebuilding these tents have shown how well the hides regulate temperature. The thick layers trap heat, while the seams at the base allow faint drafts that prevent suffocation. One detail catches your attention. Near the top, just under the peak, there is a small opening. It is a vent, wide enough to let smoke escape, but narrow enough to keep out snow. The edge is stiffened with willow branches, preventing it from collapsing inward. When the wind blows, the opening flutters like a heartbeat, drawing air through the space. The design works much like the lungs of a body, inhaling and exhaling as the fire breathes below. A few of the warriors are inside, tightening ropes and brushing snow from the roof. They work quickly, speaking in short bursts. One of them gestures for you to feel the inside wall. Despite the cold outside, it is only cool, not freezing. The hides are doubled, inner and outer layers with a gap of air between them. That pocket of air acts as insulation, much like the double walls of modern tents. Some researchers think this design came from a mix of influences. The Vikings may have borrowed ideas from nomadic Finno-Ugric tribes to the north, who built reindeer hide tents with similar ventilation systems. Others point to Anglo-Saxon field tents that used wool instead of leather, easier to repair but less resistant to snow. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, shaped by travel and trade. You crouch near the small hearth at the tent's center. It glows softly, the smoke curling upward toward the vent. There is a strange balance in the air, smoky yet breathable, warm yet not stifling. The smell of resin fills the space, mingling with the faint musk of wool and animal skins. You can see why people could sleep here for months without going mad from the cold. An unexpected detail from a 12th century Icelandic text describes tents lined with woven woolen panels called varafjól, literally warm walls. The panels could be hung like curtains and rolled up during travel. It seems primitive, but the effect is remarkable. Wool, with its crimped fibers, traps air better than almost any natural material. Inside such a tent, body heat multiplies quickly. You imagine the sound of dozens of these shelters shifting in the wind, each one breathing softly, exhaling thin ribbons of smoke that vanish into the snow-filled air. The camp must look like a field of dark, living hearts scattered across a white plain. One man sits repairing a small tear in the hide, using sinew as thread. His hands move methodically, even lovingly. He tells you that a single careless hole can drain warmth faster than an open door. He checks the seams, rubs fat into the leather, and sits back, satisfied. It is not just maintenance, it is stewardship of survival. Outside, the storm wails. Inside, the air hums with quiet talk. A woman pours warm broth from a pot suspended over the fire. The liquid steams, filling the space with the smell of herbs and salt. You take a sip. It scalds your tongue but sends a line of warmth all the way down to your stomach. Around you, others sigh in contentment. Curiously, excavations in Greenland have revealed traces of whale oil in small clay lamps found near sleeping areas. Whale oil burns longer than tallow, with a steady light and little smoke. Historians believe travelers carried these lamps in winter camps to supplement firelight during storms when fires had to be smothered for safety. The scent must have been strong, but the light would have felt precious. You listen to the storm pressing against the walls, the wind's moan replaced by a deep, rhythmic flutter of hide and rope. The tent flexes but never breaks. It moves with the weather instead of fighting it. That is perhaps the greatest secret of Viking endurance, to bend with the cold rather than resist it. A young warrior near you hums softly, a tune so low it seems to vibrate through the air. It is not quite a song, more a vibration of reassurance. Others pick it up, the harmony rising like smoke. You feel it in your chest, a wordless acknowledgement that this night, too, will pass. When the song fades, silence returns, warm and heavy. You lie back, your head resting against folded wool, and stare at the small vent above where a single star flickers through the smoke. The tent breathes around you, alive, protective and gentle. The snow keeps falling, but you hardly notice it now. The hide walls sigh softly. The fire glows, and you drift towards sleep wrapped in the heartbeat of invention. By morning, the storm has calmed to a fine drift of powder. The camp looks like it has been dusted with flour, every tent and roof softened by the night's fall. Inside, the fires glow low and steady. Men stretch and groan, rubbing their arms and stamping their feet to wake the blood. Then, as routine takes over, you see one of the oldest customs unfold, the ritual of drinking against the cold. A warrior ladles steaming liquid from a cauldron, and the air fills with the scent of honey and spice. It is mead, thick and golden, heated just enough to burn away the chill. He passes it around, each man taking a swallow before handing it on. The first sip stings, sweet and sharp at once, flooding warmth down the throat. You can almost feel the fire spreading through your chest. Viking Age sources make frequent mention of hot drinks in winter, though few specify exactly what they contained. Archaeological finds of cauldrons and wooden cups in graves suggest that communal drinking was more than celebration. It was survival strategy. Warm liquids helped raise body temperature and kept spirits from sinking into the dark fatigue of endless cold. But it wasn't always mead. Broth, milk, or fermented whey were common substitutes, each fortified with fat. A pot of fish stew left simmering overnight would thicken into a kind of drinkable porridge by morning. Travelers sometimes added animal blood to it for extra iron, a detail preserved in later Icelandic recipes. To modern ears it sounds grim, but to a frozen stomach, it was nourishment and heat. Curiously, residue analysis on pottery shards from Hedeby revealed traces of barley, honey, and herbs like yarrow and juniper. These were ingredients for spiced ale, a beverage that blurred the line between medicine and indulgence. Drinking together was more than pleasure. It was a shared act of staying alive. You watch them now as they pass the bowl again, laughter echoing softly against the walls. The sound feels heavier than the air, full of relief. They are not celebrating victory. They are celebrating endurance. One of the younger men, his beard rimed with frost, jokes that a real warrior drinks until he forgets how cold he is. The older ones smile but say nothing. They know too much mead dulls more than pain. There are sagas that tell of warriors freezing to death because they fell asleep drunk beside the fire. So they ration it carefully, balancing warmth and wisdom. Some researchers believe that alcohol played a complex role in Viking winter life. It eased the body's shivering response, making the cold seem distant for a time. Yet it also caused heat to leave the body faster, a deadly trade. The Vikings must have sensed this instinctively. Their songs praise mead for courage, but warn against excess. Perhaps, as with fire, they learned to respect the fine line between comfort and danger. A curious practice mentioned in a few medieval Norwegian texts describes heating stones in the fire and dropping them into a barrel of ale to make it warm. The hiss and foam that followed were a spectacle in itself, and the drink, smoky and sweet, could last for hours. You imagine the flickering light on their faces as they gathered around, cups steaming in their hands. For those who could not afford honey or ale, there was always broth. A pot of bones, onions, and salt would simmer quietly, its surface glistening with fat. The scent drifted through the camp, mingling with the smoke and the faint musk of fur. Even now you can picture the thin curls of steam rising in the chill air, carrying the promise of warmth to anyone who smelled it. An intriguing note from an early Christian missionary in Scandinavia records that locals often poured a drop of their drink into the fire before consuming it. He called it pagan superstition, but it was likely an offering to Logi, spirit of flame. To the Vikings, every source of warmth had a guardian. Drinking beside the hearth meant honoring it. The effect of the drink is immediate. Faces flush, shoulders loosen, conversation begins. You realize how much the body craves not just heat but companionship. Shared warmth tastes better. The cup passes again, slower this time, and the laughter fades into soft talk about ships, harvests, and omens. Outside, the snow glows pale blue in the morning light. A few men step out, steaming breath rising like smoke from their mouths. One pours the dregs of his cup into the snow, murmuring something under his breath, perhaps gratitude, perhaps habit. The dogs watch with quiet eyes, tails wagging, hoping for scraps. Inside, someone adds another log to the fire. The flames leap higher, reflected in the surface of the cauldron. The smell of honey fills the air again. You sip once more, feeling the liquid slide down your throat, heavy with sweetness. For a brief moment, the world feels warm and safe. Later, when the pot is empty, they rinse the cups with melted snow and hang them by the fire to dry. It is a small act of order, a gesture of control in a season that allows little of it. Every task, every sip, every shared smile holds the same meaning. Keep the cold outside and life within. The wind picks up again, brushing against the tent walls. You hear the soft whistle it makes through the seams, like a distant flute. One man hums to it, a low tune that drifts between contentment and melancholy. You close your eyes, the taste of warmth still on your tongue, and listen until the sound fades. The night is quiet except for the low hum of wind moving through the pines. You can hear the slow creak of wood, the whisper of snow sliding off a roof, and the occasional crack from a settling log in the hearth. Inside one of the huts, men begin to unwind from the long day. The air feels heavy, thick with heat and the smell of resin. Now comes the time for what they call kveldssette, the evening sitting, when bodies and minds prepare to cross from wakefulness into rest. You notice that they do not simply collapse into sleep. There is a rhythm to how they slow themselves down. A few of them remove belts and weapons first, hanging axes and knives near their heads within easy reach. Others unlace boots, stuff them with straw to dry, and set them upside down near the fire. The glow of the coals paints the scene with a soft red light, flickering over fur and wood and tired eyes. One man, broad-shouldered and quiet, dips his fingers into a bowl of animal oil and rubs it onto his arms and hands. He explains that it keeps the skin from cracking in the cold. The smell is sharp, like salt and smoke mixed together. You imitate him, and the sensation is strange but soothing. The oil forms a faint sheen that catches the firelight. Fragments of Norse poetry hint at such habits, describing warriors who anoint their limbs with fat before travel or sleep. Archaeologists have even found small wooden pots containing traces of tallow and beeswax, perhaps used for the same purpose. It was both protection and comfort, a nightly ritual that turned survival into ceremony. Nearby, another man pours water into a wooden bowl and adds a pinch of dried herbs. Steam rises slowly, carrying a scent of pine and something floral. He splashes the water over his face and neck, shivering as it hits his skin. You realize this is their version of washing. It is not about cleanliness alone, but about signaling the body that the work of the day is done. Some accounts from later Icelandic farm life describe evening baths taken in wooden tubs filled with warm water drawn from the hearth. The Vikings of winter camps had no such luxury, but they improvised. Heated stones placed in snow could melt enough water for wiping down, and in the bitterest nights, even that small act felt like luxury. A curious discovery made at a burial site in Denmark included small combs carved from antler, their teeth worn smooth by constant use. Grooming, it seems, was part of discipline. You imagine them passing the comb through tangled hair, not for vanity but for order, a way of telling themselves that civilization still existed, even here among frost and shadows. As they finish their washing and oiling, someone begins to speak softly. It is not quite a prayer, not quite a poem. He recites lines invoking Frigg, goddess of home and comfort, asking her to guard their dreams from mischief and fear. His voice is steady, carrying over the sound of crackling wood. Others listen in silence, the way you might listen to the wind or the tide. Written sources from later Christianized Scandinavia mention nighttime prayers adapted from older pagan customs. The words changed, but the intention remained: to greet the night with respect. To sleep in a Viking camp was to surrender not just to rest, but to vulnerability. Every prayer, every whispered name of a god, was a shield against the unknown. After the short chant, a woman enters carrying a small bowl of broth. She ladles a little into each wooden cup, her hands steady despite the tremor of cold air that follows her inside. The broth is thin but hot, flavored with bone and herbs. Each man drinks silently, savoring the warmth. When she finishes, she places the bowl by the fire and sits beside it, eyes half closed. Her presence feels like another kind of flame, quiet and enduring. What surprises you most is the calm. There is no rush, no frantic movement. Every gesture, from washing to prayer, is measured. It feels almost meditative. You can see now that these routines are not random. They are a way to manage fear and fatigue, to turn chaos into habit. Some scholars of Norse daily life suggest that such structured rituals helped prevent despair during the endless winter darkness. Without sunlight, the body's rhythm falters. So the Vikings made their own pattern: work, warmth, cleansing, food and rest. Each night repeated the same steps, anchoring them to something predictable when the world outside was nothing but uncertainty. The smell of herbs and smoke begins to mingle. Someone hums a low tune, a wordless melody that echoes softly off the timber walls. You feel the sound more than hear it, a vibration that settles the nerves. It might have been a lullaby once, sung by mothers who waited for men to return from the sea. Here it serves the same purpose, easing minds into sleep. The fire has burned down now, only the occasional flicker of orange showing through the ash. You watch as one man lies down and tucks his cloak around his shoulders. Another pulls a fur over both of them. Slowly the voices fade until only breathing remains. You lie down too, the smell of oil and pine filling your nose. In the stillness, you sense that this is more than survival. It is a kind of faith, practiced not in temples but in daily repetition. Fire, oil, breath, and sleep each part of a quiet liturgy to endure the night. You close your eyes, feeling the warmth of the floor beneath you and the slow rhythm of others breathing nearby. Outside, the cold is absolute. Inside, life persists, patient and deliberate. The night presses close around the camp, a dark so deep it seems to swallow sound. The only light comes from the coals glowing like dull rubies in the hearth. You shift slightly under your cloak, the weight of fur heavy across your shoulders. Around you, the men are settling into stillness, the quiet broken only by the creak of leather and the sigh of slow breathing. Then, in the dimness, you notice something gleaming near every sleeper's hand, the unmistakable curve of metal. Viking warriors never slept unarmed. Within reach of every man lies an axe, a knife, or a short sword. The weapons glint faintly in the firelight, dulled by use but carefully placed. They are not scattered carelessly. Each has a position, just as each man does. The haft of the axe faces the sleeper's dominant hand, the blade turned away to avoid accidental injury in the night. It is a small detail that reveals a world of discipline. Archaeological excavations at Trelleborg and Furkat have uncovered living quarters with benches wide enough to serve as beds, each with a space carved out at the head for a weapon. The habit was not symbolic but practical. Raids, ambushes, and sudden attacks were constant possibilities, even within one's own camp. The Vikings treated sleep not as rest but as a brief truce with danger. One curious note comes from an Icelandic saga that describes a man who slept with his sword under his pillow, a custom believed to protect both his dreams and his life. You imagine the cold edge pressing faintly through the fabric, a reminder that even in slumber the warrior could not fully surrender. You study the faces around you. In the half-light, they look younger, gentler, stripped of the fierceness daylight demands. Yet their hands, resting on the hilts of weapons, speak another truth. The body relaxes, but the mind keeps watch. A soft sound startles you, a shift, a creak, the faint rasp of leather against fur. A guard outside moves past the door, his boots crunching in the snow. The patrols never stop. One man's sleep depends on another's vigilance. You can sense the rhythm of it, a silent agreement written into muscle memory. It is easy to romanticize Viking bravery, but here in the flicker of a dying fire, you see it differently. Courage is not only found in battle cries and bloodshed, it lives in this constant awareness, this readiness to wake and fight at any sound. The camp is a living organism, half asleep, half awake. There are records from medieval chroniclers who observed Norse travelers setting up camps in foreign lands. They noted that even after long feasts, one man always remained awake by the fire, axe across his knees. It was less an order than instinct, a tradition woven so deeply into their culture that no one questioned it. You reach for a weapon lying near your bedding. The handle feels smooth from years of use, the wood worn to fit a single hand. It is neither ornate nor delicate. This axe is a tool, a companion, a last defense. You rest it back gently, suddenly aware of how much it symbolizes the world you are standing in. An intriguing discovery made by metalworkers studying Viking artifacts is that many weapons show signs of frequent sharpening, but little polish. The warriors cared more about readiness than appearance. In a winter camp, When the mind grows heavy and the body aches, a sharp blade might be the only thing separating survival from death. One of the men opens his eyes and looks at you, smiling faintly. "Cold steel keeps warm hearts," he whispers, before rolling over again. The phrase sounds like a proverb, something passed down from generations who knew that trust was precious but never absolute. You glance toward the doorway. The flap moves slightly in the wind, letting in a thread of cold air. A guard's shadow crosses it, then fades. The sense of security is fragile, and yet, for all its fragility, it holds. In the corner, a small wooden shield leans against the wall. Its surface is marked with scars from past battles. The edges are darkened, perhaps from fire or time. Someone has carved small runes near the rim, protective symbols invoking Thor's strength. You run your fingers over them and feel how deep they cut into the wood, like promises etched into memory. A detail recorded by antiquarians centuries later describes Viking warriors placing their shields under their heads as pillows. The practice seems strange until you see it done. The shield's curve cradles the skull while keeping the weapon close. It is both comfort and protection. The fire settles lower, shadows creeping up the walls. Outside, the world is silent, except for the occasional howl of a distant wolf. Inside, the sleepers drift deeper into rest, their hands never straying far from their blades. You realize that this closeness to danger changes the very nature of sleep. It becomes something alert, something alive. Modern soldiers have spoken of the same thing, that they never truly sleep during war, only rest with eyes half open. The Vikings, you think, would understand that completely. Their slumber is not surrender but preparation. You lie back again, staring into the dim glow of the coals. The axe beside you feels like part of your own body now, an extension of instinct. The thought is both unsettling and oddly reassuring. You close your eyes and listen to the quiet, aware that everyone here, even in sleep, remains part of the watch. Outside, the guard shifts his weight, the snow crunches once more, and the camp breathes on. Inside, the weapons gleam faintly, a silent forest of steel among fur and straw. Somewhere beyond the walls, the northern lights stir again, shimmering faintly above a world that never fully sleeps. The night deepens into stillness. The air inside the hut feels thick and slow, warmed by bodies and the faint breath of the fire. You lie awake for a while, staring at the faint line of smoke twisting toward the vent. Around you, the men breathe in rhythm, their chests rising and falling beneath fur and wool. Somewhere near your feet, the dog sighs and rolls over. The silence is almost complete. And then, in the half-darkness, you begin to hear it. The small sounds of sleep, the shift of fabric, a low murmur, the kind of words that come from dreams. One man mutters a name, another laughs softly, still caught in some vision from his mind. You close your eyes and try to imagine what they see when they dream. For the Vikings, dreams carried weight. They were not dismissed as fantasy, but treated as messages, sometimes from the gods, sometimes from restless ancestors. A man who dreamed of the sea might take it as a sign to travel, while another who dreamed of fire might expect conflict. In the sagas, dreams often predict deaths, victories, and betrayals with haunting precision. You can feel that tension in the air, a quiet reverence for the unseen world that visits in sleep. Archaeological evidence rarely captures belief, but literature fills the gaps. In the saga of the Volsungs, a woman dreams of a mighty tree growing from her lover's heart, spreading branches across the world. It foretells the rise and fall of kings. Another tale describes a warrior dreaming of a wolf devouring the moon, a vision scholars believe symbolized winter's darkness swallowing the light. These are not idle stories. They are the shape of thought in a world without electric lamps or alarms. You imagine the feeling of waking in such a place, where dreams and the real cold blend together. The air presses close, and the faint smell of smoke seeps into the senses. Perhaps, for a moment, a dream of warmth feels more real than the fire itself. One man shifts beside you, his hand twitching near the hilt of his axe. His eyes move beneath closed lids. He is dreaming of battle. You can see it written on his face. His jaw tightens. His lips form soundless words. Then he exhales and relaxes again, his body sinking into the moss beneath him. Curiously, ancient Norse medical texts mention the use of herbs like mugwort and yarrow to encourage clear dreams. These plants were burned in small bundles or tucked under pillows to invite visions. You can picture a healer preparing such herbs before a journey, muttering charms while tying the stems together with a strip of leather. Perhaps a few warriors in this very camp sleep with those same leaves under their heads, waiting for wisdom to arrive in the dark. Some modern historians think the harsh environment itself shaped how the Vikings understood dreams. The isolation of winter, the long hours of darkness, and the rhythm of the fire's glow all worked like hypnosis. The boundary between the waking world and the dream world blurred. When you live half your life in shadow, the mind learns to find light elsewhere. The old sagas tell of men who claimed to see omens while drifting between waking and sleep. One described a woman standing over him, her hair shining like ice. She whispered that he would not live to see spring. Another claimed to see ravens flying through his shelter, though no one else saw them. Historians still discuss whether these visions were symbolic, spiritual, or products of exhaustion. Whatever the truth, they mattered deeply to those who dreamed them. The air in the hut feels different now. The fire has burned down to faint embers, and the room glows with a reddish half-light. The faces around you look softer, caught between worlds. Someone whispers a line of an old poem half-conscious. Dreams are the hall of the hidden gods. His voice fades into quiet again. You shift under your cloak, your own eyes growing heavy. The rhythm of the camp is hypnotic. You begin to notice small flashes in your own mind. A river of ice, a flicker of fire, the shape of a longship beneath the aurora. They feel vivid for a moment, as if you are slipping into the same stream that the old warriors trusted. Later, you will not remember exactly what you dreamed, only the sense of movement and warmth. But as you drift, you realize that this nightly surrender to visions might have been one of the few comforts in such a hard world. Dreams gave them stories when daylight offered none. Outside, snow falls again, soft and soundless. Inside, the sleepers lie still, watched only by the faint pulse of the fire. The air smells faintly of pine and ash. Somewhere in the darkness, a man sighs, and another murmurs a prayer. The gods of the north listen in silence, weighing dreams against destiny. You exhale, letting your breath merge with the smoky air. The cold presses close to the walls, but inside there is only warmth, stillness, and the quiet flutter of sleeping minds chasing the light that hides beyond the storm. Morning light spills through a thin gap in the roof, golden against the smoke-streaked wood. The fire smoulders quietly, sending slow ribbons of grey into the air. You sit up and stretch, your back cracking, your hands rough from cold. The camp smells heavy and real, sweat, fur, and smoke blended into something almost earthy. It is the scent of living close to the edge. Hygiene is not a luxury here, but it exists in its own rugged form. You watch a man lift a bundle of dried herbs from a pouch, toss it onto the coals, and fan the smoke around the tent. The air fills with an aroma of sage and heather, sharp enough to sting your nose. He is not trying to scent the room for pleasure, he is fumigating it. The Vikings called this a smoke bath. Excavations at medieval farmsteads in Iceland and Norway have revealed layers of soot and ash in spaces that were clearly not hearths. Some historians believe these corners were used specifically for smoke cleansing, a method of driving away lice and bacteria, long before anyone understood the word infection. It was both sanitation and ritual. The smoke curled around them like protection. Curiously, residue analysis of burned herbs from one site identified juniper and wormwood, both natural insect repellents. You picture it now, a thin haze of fragrant smoke weaving between the sleeping men, settling into their clothes, pushing back the invisible hunger of vermin. Nearby, another man takes a small comb from his belt. It is carved from reindeer antler, its teeth uneven from years of use. He drags it through his beard slowly, each stroke pulling free bits of ice and stray hairs. Every Viking carried one. In fact, combs appear more frequently in grave goods than weapons, which says something about what mattered to them. A later chronicler, writing about Norse settlers in the British Isles, remarked that the locals found them fastidious in grooming and believed it made them unnervingly attractive. You smile at that thought, imagining a camp full of rugged warriors combing their hair before battle or bed. Cleanliness was power too, a way of separating civilization from savagery. You move closer to the fire, letting the smoke brush against your clothes. It clings instantly, settling into the fabric, masking the smell of sweat. Some researchers suggest that the layers of smoke and soot actually preserved clothing, forming a natural barrier against damp and decay. To modern eyes, it looks filthy. To theirs, it was armor of a different kind. One of the women stirs a pot filled with melted snow and ashes. She dips a cloth into it and begins scrubbing a wool tunic, her motions strong and practiced. The mixture, she explains, contains lye from the ashes, a primitive soap that lifts grease from the fabric. The smell is pungent, but strangely clean. When she wrings the cloth out, steam rises from it, twisting into the air like pale silk. A small boy crouches nearby, tossing bits of dried moss into the coals and watching them flare. He laughs when the sparks jump. His mother scolds him gently and wipes his nose with a scrap of linen. The gesture feels timeless, the same as any parent calming a restless child before sleep. You realize that hygiene here is not just about the body, it is about routine, about control in a world ruled by chaos. Folklore from the northern coasts speaks of cleansing fires, believed to chase away spirits that carried sickness. Whether superstition or instinct, it worked. The heat sterilized the air, the smoke smothered parasites, and the habit became ritual. Modern scientists have even found that juniper smoke contains compounds that kill airborne bacteria. The old wisdom had teeth after all. You take the comb when it's offered to you, the handle smooth and warm from another hand. As you pull it through your hair, the static crackles and bits of frost fall to the floor. It feels almost luxurious, this simple act of order. You catch your reflection in a small bronze mirror lying on a fur-covered chest. The image is dim, blurred, but you see your own tired face looking back. The mirror was not vanity either. It was reassurance that you still existed, still human, beneath layers of dirt and cold. One of the older men begins to hum an old tune as he tends the smoke. It sounds like a lullaby wrapped in sadness. The camp quiets, listening. The smell of sage deepens, filling the lungs. For a moment, the space feels holy, the kind of holiness that has nothing to do with temples and everything to do with staying alive. Later, as the smoke clears, the tent feels lighter. The air tastes cleaner. Someone jokes that even the fleas have frozen by now. Laughter follows, low and tired but genuine. You realize that humor is another form of hygiene here, washing the mind the way smoke cleans the air. The woman hangs the clean tunic on a line near the fire. Drops of water fall from it, sizzling as they hit the coals. Steam rises, carrying the smell of wool and ash. It is oddly comforting. You breathe in deeply, letting it fill your chest. Outside, the snow keeps falling, soft as dust. Inside, there is warmth, order, and a strange kind of purity. The smoke curls one last time before fading into the dark, leaving behind only the faint memory of herbs and the quiet satisfaction of another small victory over winter. Outside, the world is deep in silence. Snow has muffled every sound, so even the creak of a tree or the distant cry of a raven feels far away. Inside the camp, life continues quietly. You close your eyes for a moment and simply listen. It is astonishing how alive the stillness is. The camp does not sleep entirely. It breathes, hums, murmurs in its own slow rhythm. The soundscape of a Viking winter night is its own kind of music. Nearest to you is the steady crackle of fire, the soft collapse of wood giving way to ash. The flame pops now and then, sending up a spark that dances against the hide walls. You can hear breathing too, a dozen men shifting in their sleep, some snoring lightly, others silent as stones. The layered breathing fills the space like the ocean tide, rising and falling with the same ancient patience. Beyond the tent, the wind slides through the pine forest. It makes a low, mournful sound that might be mistaken for singing if you didn't know better. The branches sway and creak, whispering to one another. Occasionally, you hear the dull thud of snow slipping from a bough and landing on frozen ground. The sound is soft yet powerful, like the slow punctuation of the night. A scholar who once studied the acoustics of reconstructed longhouses noticed that the shape of the interior amplified low tones and muffled sharp ones. The result was an environment filled with a deep, calming resonance. Perhaps that explains the stillness you feel now. Even when people speak softly, their voices blend into the room rather than cutting through it. It is as though the very architecture invites rest. There are smaller sounds too, so subtle they could be lost in daylight. The sigh of leather stretching as a warrior turns in his sleep, the faint jingle of a metal clasp brushing against wood, the slow drip of melted snow from the roof beams. Each sound marks time differently, not by clocks but by living rhythms. A fragment from an old saga describes a man lying awake at night in a camp, much like this one, listening to the talk of fire and frost. The phrase fits perfectly. The fire speaks in crackles and sighs. The frost answers in small pops as ice forms and breaks outside. Together they compose a conversation that never ends. You realize that this world is never truly silent. Even quiet holds movement. The dogs outside stir occasionally, padding across the snow. Their claws make a faint, scratching sound. Sometimes they growl softly, not in anger but in warning, sensing something far beyond your human range. The goats shuffle too, their bells clinking in a rhythm that reminds you of heartbeats. Curiously, archaeologists examining Viking settlements have noted that the layout of sleeping spaces often positioned the hearth and animals close together, creating overlapping layers of noise. To modern sensibilities it might seem chaotic, but in a landscape of predators and storms, constant sound meant life. Silence was the danger. Silence meant something had gone wrong. You listen harder now. In the distance, wolves are calling. Their howls start low, rising into long, echoing notes that carry across the frozen fields. The dogs reply with short barks, a challenge and a warning. For a moment, the entire camp seems to hold its breath. Then the wolves fade, their song drifting away into the cold. Someone mutters in his sleep, perhaps naming a god under his breath, and the spell breaks. One of the younger men stirs and throws a few twigs onto the fire. They flare with a hiss, and the light ripples over every surface. The colors are warm amber, orange, gold dancing across faces and walls. You can almost hear the shadows move as the light changes, the air making soft groans where it meets the heat. The hut feels like a living thing, its wooden ribs expanding and settling, whispering like an old storyteller. An ethnomusicologist once proposed that these sounds may have influenced early Norse music. The rhythmic beating of waves, the hiss of fire, and the moaning of wind could all have found their echoes in the steady pulse of drums or the drawn-out notes of songs sung in darkness. The Vikings did not separate nature from art. They lived inside the melody of their world. You shift slightly, pulling the fur higher around your shoulders. The warmth of your own breath mixes with the air inside the cloak, forming a faint mist. You hear a man nearby whisper something in his sleep. It sounds like the start of a lullaby, an old one perhaps, passed down through too many winters to count. The words are lost, but the tone is tender. Outside, the storm returns briefly, wind sighing through cracks in the wall. The fire flickers, answering the wind's rhythm. The contrast between the two, the wild cold outside and the contained warmth inside, creates a harmony of opposites. You realize that this is what kept them sane. The sound of survival was not silence, but balance. Eventually, your own heartbeat joins the rhythm of the camp. The rustle of straw, the crack of fire, the whisper of wind, it all folds into a single, endless lullaby. You close your eyes, letting it fill your mind. The wolves are far away now, the dogs quiet, the men breathing evenly. The sound of a Viking night is not noise. It is a reminder that life, however fragile, continues to hum even under the heaviest snow. By the time night returns, the air has changed. The temperature drops sharply, and the cold becomes heavy enough to taste. The trees outside stand stiff and brittle, their branches coated in layers of ice. The sky is a pale wash of light from a rising moon, cold and thin like silver on glass. Inside the camp, the mood shifts. Everyone senses it. The kind of night that tests the limits of endurance has arrived. The snow begins quietly, small flakes drifting sideways in the wind. Soon it thickens into a blizzard that hides everything. The world vanishes behind a curtain of white. You hear the sound of it before you see it, a soft hiss that builds into a steady roar as gusts sweep across the valley. Tents bow under the weight, ropes tighten and creak, and men hurry to reinforce the walls with whatever they can find. A few step outside to clear snow from the roofs, but they move cautiously, roped together at the waist. Visibility is almost gone. Within minutes, their shapes blur into shadows. You watch from inside, the fire reflecting in their faces when they glance back through the storm. The wind howls like an animal, a deep throaty growl that never stops. Accounts from Greenland and Iceland mention storms so fierce that people could not see the fire across their own hearths. These nights were called snow burials. The phrase fits perfectly. The camp is slowly being swallowed, not by danger in the usual sense, but by the sheer weight of nature. Inside, the air grows colder despite the fire. Every gap in the wall becomes a threat. Men press moss into the cracks, pile furs higher, pull cloaks tighter. The animals huddle close too. Even the dogs are quiet, their ears back, their eyes reflecting the firelight like amber stones. Archaeological evidence from excavated longhouses in Iceland shows that, during harsh winters, inhabitants sometimes blocked entrances entirely and created tunnels of snow for ventilation. It sounds desperate, yet the snow itself acted as insulation, sealing in warmth. You can feel that principle taking hold here as drifts climb higher outside. The world is being buried, but with burial comes protection. One of the older warriors, his beard crusted with frost, begins to dig along the base of the tent wall. You join him, scooping snow inward, packing it firmly against the hide. At first it feels absurd, burying your own shelter, but the logic becomes clear. The snow, dense and air-filled, forms a shield. When the work is done, the wind outside no longer shrieks so loudly. It feels as if the camp has gone underwater, sound muted, movement slow. You sit again near the fire, your hands tingling from effort. The flame burns low, but its glow looks stronger now, more focused in the dim space. The smell of smoke and wet fur mixes with the cold, metallic scent of the air. It is both claustrophobic and comforting. An experiment by survivalists in northern Scandinavia showed that a snow shelter, when properly built, can maintain an inside temperature near freezing even if the air outside falls below -30. The Vikings may not have measured degrees, but they understood the difference between deathly cold and livable chill. The storm teaches that lesson quickly. Hours pass. The wind still roars outside, but the rhythm inside the camp has slowed. People speak less, voices muffled by the thick air. The snow covering the walls blocks all light, leaving only the trembling glow of the fire. Shadows stretch across the hides, long and wavering, like the fingers of the storm itself pressing against the camp. You think about what this kind of night does to the mind. Darkness without distance, sound without space. Some scholars suggest that isolation in Arctic storms may have inspired elements of Norse mythology, the endless frost of Niflheim, the whispering wind that carries the voices of giants. The human mind reaches for story when reason freezes. One man mutters a prayer to Thor, asking him to break the storm. Another laughs softly, saying Thor is busy wrestling with Jotun winds. The laughter helps. It breaks the tension. Soon others join in, telling small jokes, swapping memories of summers and feasts. The warmth of speech becomes a second fire, flickering in the dark. A strange peace follows. The snow presses harder against the walls, but the camp holds steady. The roof bows slightly, and frost crystals form on the beams, glittering faintly in the firelight. You can hear melting drops falling onto the ash with tiny hisses. It feels almost alive, as if the shelter itself is breathing. Later, when you crawl beneath your cloak, the space feels close, thick with shared air. You can sense the presence of others without seeing them. Their breathing forms a steady rhythm, joined by the faint crackle of the hearth and the sigh of the storm above. You know that outside, the world is lost under white. Inside, there is only warmth and patience. You close your eyes and imagine the snow settling over the camp like a blanket. The storm's voice softens to a whisper. In the stillness, the earth itself seems to hum quietly, the same tune that has carried countless lives through winters like this one. You understand then that surviving the cold is not defiance. It is surrender to its rhythm, learning to breathe with it until dawn. The blizzard finally weakens as dawn begins to grey the horizon. The camp looks buried, only faint shapes of roofs and poles visible under the mounds of snow. Inside, it is still dim and quiet. A few men stir, shaking off furs crusted with frost. Someone laughs softly when a goat sneezes near the door. The night has passed, but the cold still lingers like an unwelcome spirit. As you move through the half-light, you notice how the women have already begun to work. Their movements are calm and practiced, small circles of efficiency amid the slow waking of the camp. One crouches by the hearth, stirring coals until they glow red again. Another brushes snow from the bedding, humming a song so soft it barely rises above her breath. Her voice fills the space with something warmer than fire. The women of these winter camps are not idle companions. They are the hidden strength behind the rhythm of survival. In saga literature, they appear less often than warriors, yet every description carries quiet authority. They mend cloaks, heal wounds, ration food, and keep tempers from breaking in the dark months when men grow restless. Archaeological studies of graves from Viking settlements show tools and medical items buried with women needles, herbs, even small knives for surgery. Their work held the same weight as any blade drawn in battle. You watch one of them, her hands stained from soot, sewing a rip in a fur cloak. Her needle flashes in the firelight. She is humming again, perhaps a lullaby remembered from home. The men nearby listen without comment. They know the sound keeps fear away. It fills the cracks left by silence and wind. An old Norse saying survives in a later collection. Cold fights no house with a busy woman. You see what it means now. She moves constantly, checking walls, shaking snow from hides, feeding scraps to the animals. Every action is a defense against the creeping cold. One young woman tends to a man whose hand has blistered from frostbite. She unwraps the cloth carefully, her breath steady. She rubs the wound with animal fat mixed with powdered herbs. The smell is strong, pungent but healing. Historians studying early Scandinavian medicine have found that seal fat and crushed juniper were common treatments for frostburn, both antibacterial and insulating. The knowledge was practical, passed from mother to daughter rather than written in books. Another woman pours broth into wooden bowls. She stirs it with a carved spoon, scraping bits from the bottom to make sure none is wasted. The smell fills the hut, rich with fish and herbs. The men reach for the bowls like children, grateful and silent. You realize that in this frozen world, nourishment is love made visible. A curious find from a Swedish burial mound revealed a woman buried with a ladle and a small iron pot beside her. The archaeologists called her the camp mother. It is easy to picture her here, ladle in hand, watching over the fire while the men sleep. The balance of strength and tenderness is not contradiction but necessity. You notice too how they keep peace among the men. When tempers flare from confinement, a word from one of the women is often enough to cool it. Their authority is not loud, but steady. In a space where cold can kill and pride can ruin, patience becomes power. Folklore hints that women carried charms of warmth, tiny pouches filled with feathers or wool tied with red thread. They were said to protect against the cold spirit Skadi or against loneliness, which could be just as deadly. Whether magic or memory, the act itself held meaning. You imagine fingers tying the thread, whispering a name, placing the charm under a pillow. The youngest woman in camp, no more than 15, sits spinning wool near the door. Her spindle hums in the quiet, the thread twisting between her fingers like smoke. The rhythm of spinning is hypnotic. The wool she makes will become mittens, socks, maybe another blanket. Every rotation of the spindle is a small rebellion against the cold. You look around the hut and realize that warmth here is not just measured in fire or fur. It is built from care, from touch, from the soft voices that fill the silence. These women carry the memory of comfort through a season that has almost forgotten it. One of them looks at you and smiles faintly. Her cheeks are pink from heat, her hair pulled back in a rough braid. She says something simple, a phrase that even without translation feels like reassurance. Perhaps it means, "The storm is finished," or "You are safe now." You nod, feeling an unfamiliar calm settle over you. Outside, light spills through the hole in the roof. The air sparkles with frost dust. The men begin to move again, pulling on boots, checking weapons. Life resumes. But before they step out into the frozen world, each pauses near the hearth where the women stand. A nod, a murmur, a glance, tiny gestures of gratitude that no saga will ever record. You realize that these camps survived not through strength alone, but through tenderness woven into routine. In this world, endurance wears many faces, and the softest among them are often the bravest. The fire flares again, golden and alive. The women keep moving, quiet architects of warmth in a landscape built of ice. The days shorten again, and the horizon disappears beneath a pale haze of snow. The sea is frozen now, an unbroken sheet of white, stretching toward a sky the color of steel. You stand near the edge of camp, staring at the fjord. The ships are trapped in ice, their hulls caught mid-motion, like beasts turned to stone. You can almost hear the echo of summer waves somewhere beneath the frozen surface. When trade routes close, the world contracts. The Vikings called this time fjordlock, the locking of the fjords. It meant months of isolation. No ships came from the south bringing news or salt or mead. No fishermen returned from open water with silver-scaled cod. The sea, once their path to every horizon, had become a wall of silence. Inside the camp, the change is felt immediately. Voices grow quieter. The laughter that once rolled easily around the fire now comes in shorter bursts. Supplies must be counted carefully, each dried fish or loaf of bread rationed to last until spring. You watch as they open a chest and measure out handfuls of grain. The dust of it hangs in the air like gold before vanishing into bowls. Archaeological studies of winter storage pits in Scandinavia reveal an impressive system of preservation. Grain and salted meat were buried in lined holes or kept in sealed barrels packed with snow. The earth itself became a refrigerator. Sometimes the pits froze so hard that axes were needed to break the food free. You imagine the sound of metal striking frozen meat, echoing through the camp like distant bells. The longer isolation lasts, the more the mind begins to wander. The men grow restless. You see them sharpening weapons that have no battle to fight, mending sails they cannot yet use. Their energy needs somewhere to go, so they tell stories. Each evening, when the fire is lit, one of them begins, and soon the whole camp is drawn into his voice. A merchant tells of a voyage south to the markets of Hedeby, where silver gleamed like sunlight on water. A farmer recalls green fields in Jutland, warm rain, the sound of bees. They talk not to pass time, but to push back against the shrinking world outside. Stories become fuel when food grows scarce. One detail recorded by travelers in medieval Norway mentions that people in winter would take turns speaking through the night, so no one drifted too deep into despair. They called it vetramal, the winter talk. You hear it happening now. The fire burns low, the light flickering over faces that lean close to listen. Sometimes the talk turns strange. A man swears he saw figures walking across the ice at dusk. Another claims to have heard drums beneath the frozen sea. The others laugh, but quietly. You can tell that they half believe him. The isolation blurs the line between what is real and what the mind invents to fill the void. Some historians have suggested that these long nights of confinement shaped Norse mythology itself. The endless dark of winter may have given birth to the vision of Ragnarok, the final battle when the world freezes and burns at once. When the days blend together and the sky never brightens, it is easy to imagine that the end of the world has already begun. You walk outside for a moment, the cold biting at your face. The sound of the camp fades until you hear only the soft crack of shifting ice. The frozen fjord glitters under the moonlight, smooth and perfect. Somewhere below it, fish still move slowly through the black water. Life persists, unseen. You breathe in deeply. The air so cold, it feels like glass in your chest. Inside, the firelight spills through the cracks of the walls. Shadows move behind it, flickering shapes that could be warriors or ghosts. You remember the stories they told earlier and feel a shiver that has nothing to do with the temperature. The land itself seems alive, listening. Back in the hut, the air feels thick and warm again. Someone is carving a small wooden figure, a charm for luck. He presses a hole through its center and threads it with a strip of wool. He tells you it is a gift to remind himself that spring will come. The gesture is simple, almost childish, but it carries a quiet defiance. Curiously, several Viking graves contain small wooden carvings shaped like people or animals, their faces worn smooth by touch. Archaeologists once thought they were toys, but new interpretations suggest they were tokens of endurance. The frozen months demanded faith, even if it was faith in a small piece of wood. You sit by the fire as another story begins. This one is about a woman who waited through 10 winters for her husband to return from the sea. Each year she placed a stone on the shore for every season he was gone. When he finally came home, the shore had turned into a cairn tall enough to break the wind. The men listen silently. None of them laugh this time. The wind rises again outside, a low, steady moan that blends with the storyteller's voice. You watch the firelight shimmer across the walls, the heat rippling through the air. The fjord may be locked, but inside these walls the world still moves. Speech, memory, laughter, these are the currents that carry them through the frozen months. You close your eyes for a moment, hearing the murmur of voices mingling with the wind. The walls creak, the ice groans, and the camp breathes as one. In the heart of the storm, the Vikings have learned something timeless, that when the sea and sky close in, stories become the only horizon left. The storm clouds finally drift away, leaving behind a sky so clear it feels carved from glass. The stars shimmer brighter than firelight, and a thin sliver of moon glows pale above the snow. The camp is quiet. Smoke curls gently from the vents in the roofs, rising into the still night. It is the kind of calm that feels both fragile and sacred, the brief pause between storms. You sit close to the hearth, watching the last logs burn down. The heat is steady but not fierce, more like the steady pulse of a living heart. Around you the others are half asleep, heads resting on arms, cloaks pulled tight. It is a peaceful moment, and yet their silence feels full. In the flicker of the flames, you can almost sense their thoughts reaching towards something greater than the cold. Faith is warmth here. The Vikings carried gods with them as surely as they carried fire, and in winter those gods mattered more than ever. You hear a man whisper the name of Logi, spirit of flame, said to be kin to Loki. He thanks the fire aloud for surviving another night. The words are simple, almost casual, yet they hang in the smoky air like prayer. An Icelandic saga mentions that Logi was not merely fire but hunger itself, the consuming force that drives life to keep burning. The connection makes sense. Around you, every ember glows like a small hunger refusing to die. A woman begins to hum, her voice low and rhythmic. It is not a song for men but for the hearth itself. The melody sways with the flicker of light, rising and falling with the fire's breath. For a moment, even the wind outside quiets, as though listening. One fascinating discovery at a Viking farmstead in Norway revealed small carved stones placed near the remains of ancient hearths. Some bore marks that archaeologists interpret as runes for heat or protection. These stones, once blackened by soot, were likely offerings to the household spirits. They served as insurance for survival, tokens of gratitude for each dawn that followed a frozen night. You can imagine that feeling now. Gratitude not as ceremony but as instinct. Every breath of warm air, every spark that catches, is a blessing. In the corner of the hut, a man pulls out a small wooden amulet shaped like a flame. He rubs it between his fingers while murmuring softly. He tells you it belonged to his mother, who used to light candles each winter's night and pray to keep the household fire alive. That ritual lives here too, far from her hearth. The fire he tends is her memory made visible. Scholars studying Norse religion often debate how personal faith blended with daily survival. The gods of warmth and home, they argue, may have been less about theology and more about gratitude to natural forces that allowed breath and movement. Whether divine beings or metaphors, they offered something beyond logic, a relationship with the elements themselves. You can see that truth reflected in their gestures, a hand brushing ashes from a log, a whispered word before sleep, the quiet discipline of tending embers until dawn. Each act is small but holy. There are other deities invoked in winter too. Thor for protection from storms, Frigg for the peace of the home, Sol for the promise of returning light. Their stories circulate in the dark like sparks, each one carrying hope. One man recalls how Sol, the sun goddess, drives her chariot across the sky chased by wolves. He smiles faintly and says, "Even she keeps moving." Everyone nods. It is not myth to them, it is philosophy. Keep moving, keep burning. Never let the wolves of cold catch you. The fire pops, sending up a stream of golden sparks. For a moment they seem to hang in the air like stars inside the room. You watch them fade and think how similar they look to the aurora outside, light made from invisible struggle, the sky's own heartbeat. A strange but lovely tradition recorded in later Scandinavian folklore describes families greeting the dawn by feeding the first embers a pinch of salt or grain, thanking them for surviving the night. You can see the echo of that practice here. A woman leans forward, sprinkles something into the coals, and whispers a blessing you cannot quite hear. The flame leaps briefly, then settles again, satisfied. In the corner, someone begins to tell a story about Loki tricking a frost giant into melting his own heart with rage. The laughter that follows sounds warmer than any fire. The tale is old, known by everyone, yet it carries a familiar comfort. Storytelling is prayer too, a way to remind each other that cleverness and courage can outlast the cold. You look around at the faces glowing in the orange light. Some are weary, some thoughtful, but all are alive. You sense that every one of them, in their own way, carries a small flame within. It may flicker, but it does not go out. Outside, the stars shimmer harder, as though drawn closer by the warmth below. The moonlight glints on the frozen roofs, the ice reflecting faint colors like polished metal. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine what these nights must have felt like centuries ago, when the gods were not distant ideas but neighbors in the firelight. The wind rises again, brushing the tent like a gentle hand. The fire flares and sighs. Inside this fragile circle of light, faith and heat become the same thing, two names for the will to endure. The gods of warmth are present here, in every glowing ember, every soft breath, every hand that refuses to let the flame die. Morning arrives slow and pale, the sun barely lifting above the edge of the world. Frost clings to everything, glittering like powdered glass. You can hear the faint creak of frozen leather as people move through the camp, their breaths forming clouds that linger in the air before drifting upward. The cold is relentless, but the camp feels alive again. From every corner comes the soft rhythm of work, scraping, spinning, stitching. Today, you find yourself drawn to the women sitting near the fire, surrounded by tufts of raw wool. They pull the fibers apart with steady fingers, their gestures patient and sure. The air smells faintly of lanolin, that earthy oil that clings to the fleece. It is a scent of life, of animals and warmth and survival. This is the quiet heart of the Viking economy. Wool. The Vikings may be remembered for steel and ships, but it was wool that kept them alive through the endless winters. Archaeological finds across Scandinavia show traces of looms, spindle whorls, and combs in nearly every household. Textiles were wealth. Without them, no fur cloak or hide tent would have been enough to withstand the cold. A woman hums softly as she spins, her spindle turning like a small star in her hands. The thread gathers around it in fine, even spirals. She is making yarn that will soon become mittens or cloaks, perhaps a sail. Wool was not just for clothing. Thick, felted wool was used for blankets, ropes, and even to insulate the walls of huts. One particularly well-preserved site in Denmark revealed wool fibers packed between planks, proof that the Vikings understood its power to trap heat. A curious finding from Oseberg's famous ship burial included textiles so finely woven that experts believe they were luxury goods traded across Europe. Yet here in the cold, you see the humbler side of that craft, hands working through repetition and memory, not fashion. Each strand is twisted with care, each length of yarn a piece of someone's endurance. A young girl sits beside her mother, helping tease knots from a clump of fleece. Her hands are red from the cold, but her eyes shine with focus. The older woman smiles, correcting her gently, showing her how to twist the fibers tighter. Knowledge passes quietly like this from one pair of hands to another. No books, no words, just the rhythm of creation. Historians studying Norse trade networks have long noted how much wool flowed outward from the north. Sails for ships were woven from it, each massive sheet requiring hundreds of hours of spinning. One sail could use the wool of 50 sheep. The Vikings conquered seas on waves carried by wool, and then came home to wrap themselves in the same substance for sleep. It was both armor and comfort. You watch as one of the women takes a length of finished yarn and begins to knit it into a narrow band. She hums a different tune now, something faster, almost cheerful. The band will become a tie for a cloak or a strap for boots. Small things matter most when the world freezes. Every loop of wool is a promise of warmth yet to come. A curious experiment by modern archaeologists recreating Viking textiles showed that tightly woven wool could resist wind almost as effectively as modern outdoor fabrics. It even remained warm when soaked through, thanks to its natural oils. The Vikings didn't need theory to prove it. They learned from the land, from sheep that survived the same weather that threatened them. You walk to the corner where a man is brushing down a pelt of sheepskin. He holds it up proudly, its surface shining in the light. "Better than gold," he says, half joking, and you realize he might be right. In this world, gold buys pride, but wool buys life. The fire pops suddenly, sending sparks upward. The women laugh and cover their wool, protecting it from stray ash. Laughter like that feels precious here, a reminder that warmth is not only in the body, but in the mood of the room. The hum of their work, the flicker of the fire, the smell of wool and smoke, all of it weaves together into something deeply human. One story preserved in later Icelandic folklore tells of a woman who spun through the night to keep the winter from lasting forever. The gods, moved by her perseverance, granted the dawn one day early. Whether true or not, the story fits perfectly. Spinning is a kind of defiance against darkness. Each turn of the spindle brings a little more light into being. You reach for a piece of fleece yourself. It is coarse and sticky with oil, but soft underneath. As you pull it apart, it catches the firelight, glowing faintly gold. For a moment you understand what this work must mean. The transformation of raw, stubborn material into something gentle enough to protect a life. Outside, the wind rises again, tugging at the edges of the tent. Inside, the spinning continues, steady and sure. The room fills with the whisper of thread passing through fingers, a music as ancient as breath. You can feel the heat of the fire on your face and the calm in your chest. In this frozen world, every thread connects something, hand to hand, season to season, body to shelter. The Vikings may have been masters of battle, but here they mastered endurance through patience. Wool was their second skin, their quiet weapon against the cold. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the spinning wheel's faint hum. It sounds like the heartbeat of the camp itself, turning and turning without end, as steady as the fire that never dies. The snow has hardened into a glittering crust that crunches under every step. The air is still and dry, the kind of cold that burns your throat when you breathe too quickly. The fjord remains frozen, reflecting the weak winter sun like polished glass. Today, the camp is unusually quiet. Most of the men are gathered near the shore, where the longships sleep beneath layers of frost. You follow them, the wind tugging at your cloak. As you approach, the outlines of the ships become clearer. Great curved hulls, half buried in snow, their dragon-headed prows gleaming faintly with ice. These vessels that once thundered across oceans now rest motionless, transformed into strange wooden beasts caught in winter's spell. Yet even trapped, they are alive. A few men climb aboard one of the ships. You hear the hollow thud of their boots against the planks. They are checking ropes, clearing ice, and patching small cracks where the frost has bitten deep. A ship left unattended could splinter under the weight of frozen water. You can tell that this work is not routine, it is reverence. Each man touches the hull as if greeting an old friend. Archaeological evidence from sites like Roskilde shows that Viking ships were often drawn up onto land and covered with branches or tarred cloth for winter storage. In some cases, temporary shelters of wood and turf were built over them, turning the ships into sleeping creatures waiting for spring. The same principle holds true here. The men lay planks across the deck, pack them with straw, and seal the edges with clay. The air inside will stay just warm enough to prevent the timbers from cracking. You climb aboard and crouch near the bow. The view is breathtaking. The world stretches white and endless, with only a few dark lines where trees break the snow. You imagine what it must have felt like to sail from this same spot in summer, the water alive and open. Now it is frozen solid, a mirror of silence. One of the older sailors laughs softly, tapping the rail with his mittened hand. "She dreams," he says, meaning the ship. You realize he believes it. The longship was more than transport. It was a living extension of the crew. They slept beside it even now, refusing to abandon their link to the sea. Historical records from medieval travelers mention that Viking sailors often slept aboard ships even while they were beached, preferring the familiar creak of timbers to the stillness of land. The decks would be covered with hay and hides, and men would burrow beneath them like children beneath blankets. The shape of the hull created a natural cradle, shielding them from wind. You step below the sheltering canvas where a few men are resting. The space smells of pine tar, salt, and damp wool. The wood beneath you is cold but dry. The sound of the wind outside is softer here, muted by layers of sailcloth. It feels oddly peaceful, as if you are inside the ribcage of some giant creature sleeping through winter. One of the men tells you that when the sea freezes, they dream of waves. He smiles faintly, his eyes half closed. "You can still hear it," he says. You listen and realize he is right. Beneath the ice, faint and rhythmic, comes the groan of shifting water. The sea has not died. It merely waits. Some modern researchers studying Viking seafaring habits have recreated winter voyages, finding that ships left partially frozen in place can still serve as shelters. The curved hull traps heat efficiently, especially when lined with wool or straw. It is both house and memory of travel. You settle into a corner and watch as one man mends a rope with stiff fingers. Another sharpens a small knife by firelight. The sound of scraping metal blends with the faint crackle of the brazier they have brought aboard. They talk quietly about past journeys, about harbours so far south that grass grows even in winter. Each story carries a hint of longing. The oldest sailor begins to recite lines from a poem he learned as a boy. It speaks of ships that never sink, sailing through the sky to carry the souls of the brave. His voice is low, rough as old timber, but the words fill the air with warmth. The others listen in silence, faces flickering in the glow. You realize that for them, the sea is not simply a place, but a promise. A curious artifact recovered from a Viking burial mound in Norway includes a small model ship carved from bone, placed beside the dead. Archaeologists believe it symbolized passage into the afterlife. For these people, ships were bridges between worlds. Even now, as they lie frozen, they hold that meaning. You run your hand along the curved planks, feeling the grain of the wood beneath your palm. The surface is cold but smooth, as if the ship remembers the warmth of the Sunday. You think of the journeys these men have taken, of salt spray and wind and waves, and how strange it must feel to be landlocked. Perhaps that is why they sleep here still, to keep the sea close even when it has turned to glass. Outside, the wind rises again, lifting faint trails of snow across the frozen water. The longships stand silent, their shadows stretching long across the ice. The men below deck settle into rest, wrapped in cloaks, the scent of tar and smoke surrounding them. The ship groans softly as the ice shifts, a sound like breathing. You close your eyes and listen. It feels as if the sea itself is dreaming beneath you, whispering through the wood, promising movement again. Spring will come, the ice will break, and when it does, these ships will wake from their long sleep, ready to carry their people back into the living world. The rhythm of life inside the camp is measured now by watches. The storm has eased, but vigilance never sleeps. Someone must always stay awake to feed the fire, check the walls, and listen for the sounds that do not belong. You can hear the crunch of footsteps outside, steady and deliberate. The guards change quietly, exchanging a few whispered words before one slips into the hut and another steps out into the dark. The Vikings divided the night into shifts, each marked by the slow burn of a torch or the turning of the stars. In the sagas, these shifts are called vokur, the wakes. They were both protection and ritual. To stay awake through the frozen hours was not only a duty, but a way to honor the living. The watchers became the thin line between warmth and whatever waited in the dark. You join one of them as he wraps himself in a heavy cloak and steps into the cold. The air outside bites like iron. The snow underfoot crunches with a hollow sound. The moon rides low, pale as bone, throwing long shadows across the camp. The guard moves slowly, the spear in his hand more walking stick than weapon, but his eyes miss nothing. He pauses at each shelter, listening for signs of trouble, the whimper of an animal, the flutter of a loosened flap, the faintest crack of ice. He crouches once to adjust a snowbank that's begun to drift too high against the wall. The air is so cold that every breath sparkles. You realize how lonely this duty must be. Everyone else is sleeping, breathing softly in warmth, while the watcher walks among ghosts. Historical texts suggest that Viking guards rotated every few hours, each taking a turn so that no one fell too deeply into sleep. Some researchers believe these rotations kept discipline alive in the months when idleness could destroy morale. A man who slept too long risked more than frostbite. He risked dulling his instincts. You follow the guard toward the fire pit at the camp's center. It glows faintly, embers shifting like eyes under ash. He pokes at it with a stick, stirring the coals until they flare. revealing traces of smoke curling toward the stars. "It listens," he murmurs, meaning the fire. You nod, understanding that the warmth feels like a companion in the silence. From this spot, the camp looks like a cluster of small hearts beating in the snow. Thin lines of smoke drift from the roofs, catching moonlight as they rise. The sound of snoring, faint and rhythmic, comes from nearby huts. You realize that this pattern, the sleeping, the waking, the guarding, is as much a song as a strategy. An inscription found on a runestone in Sweden mentions men who kept the wake of the hall, a phrase that scholars interpret as both literal and symbolic. To guard the hall was to guard the heart of the community. The watcher's task carried honor equal to that of the warrior. In this silence, you feel the truth of it. The guard stops suddenly. His head tilts toward the forest beyond the camp. The trees are black silhouettes against the snow, swaying gently in the wind. For a moment, you hear nothing. Then faintly, a cracking sound, like ice breaking far away. The man stiffens but does not move closer. He waits, listening. Another sound follows, softer, the scrape of something moving through brush. He breathes out slowly, the mist from his lungs hanging in the air. "A deer," he says, though you can tell he's half guessing. The forest holds its secrets. The important thing is not to panic, only to remain still and alert. The discipline of watchfulness is what keeps the fear from growing. After a few minutes, the sound fades, swallowed by wind. The guard relaxes, adjusting his cloak. He tells you that in the old days, before the Christians came, it was said that spirits roamed during the longest nights, testing the strength of mortal fire. "If your flame burns steady," he says quietly, "they passed you by." You glance at the campfire and understand why it's kept alive even at dawn. He finishes his circuit and returns to the entrance of a hut. The man who will replace him is already awake, rubbing his eyes, pulling on boots still stiff from cold. They nod in greeting, exchange a few murmured words about the weather, then trade places. The new guard steps out while the old one disappears inside to rest. The rhythm continues, unbroken. You stand for a while longer, watching the sky. The northern lights are faint tonight, a green shimmer brushing the horizon. They move slowly, like breath. The sight fills you with quiet awe. It must have filled them with the same feeling centuries ago, a reminder that even in darkness, the sky still moves, still lives. Inside the nearest hut, a faint cough echoes, followed by a sleepy curse. The fire crackles again, fed by someone half awake. Life stirs in small noises, and the watcher's job feels less lonely. You think about how this pattern has held through countless winters, through centuries of fear and faith. The cold is ancient, but so is the habit of standing against it. When you finally step back inside, the warmth feels unreal. You can still hear the faint crunch of boots outside, the slow pacing of another man taking his turn. His shadow flickers briefly through the crack in the door, steady as the heartbeat of the camp. You lie down again, your eyes closing, comforted by the rhythm of vigilance. The world may freeze, but someone is always awake. Morning comes with the faint crackle of frost melting under the first weak touch of sunlight. The air inside the hut smells of smoke and broth, faintly sweet from the fat that was rendered through the night. Men are already stirring, stretching stiff limbs, pulling on boots that have hardened during sleep. You can hear the dull rumble of empty stomachs and the clatter of wooden bowls. It is time to eat again, to stoke the body's fire. The Vikings knew that warmth began in the belly. They could not afford to eat lightly, especially in winter. A meal was both survival and strategy, designed to keep heat flowing long after the fire had faded. You watch as the morning stew is ladled into bowls, thick with barley, dried fish, and bits of animal fat that float like small coins of light in the broth. The smell fills the air, sharp and rich. When you taste it, the warmth spreads instantly through your chest and down your arms. It is simple food, but powerful. Modern nutritionists studying historical diets have discovered that such stews, high in fat and protein, were perfectly suited to cold climates. the energy released slowly, sustaining warmth for hours. The Vikings may not have understood the science, but their instincts were exact. One man breaks a piece of hard bread and dips it into the stew until it softens. The bread is dense, dark, made from barley and rye. You bite into it and taste the salt of preserved fish mixed into the dough. Nothing is wasted here. Every crumb carries work and memory. The effort of grinding grain by hand, the smoke from drying racks, the hours of stirring at the fire. A fascinating discovery at an excavation in Sweden revealed charred remains of bread that contained seeds, nuts, and traces of animal marrow. Archaeologists think this was a kind of fortified loaf, designed to replace a full meal during long journeys or harsh winters. The idea feels surprisingly modern, a protein bar from 1,000 years ago. After breakfast, a few men chew small lumps of dried fat or smoked meat wrapped in cloth. The fat leaves a sheen on their lips but brings color back to their cheeks. You understand that in this cold, fat is more precious than gold. The body burns it like oil in a lamp, slow and steady. The camp moves with more energy now. Pots are cleaned, the fire is fed, tools repaired. You can hear laughter again, low and hoarse, carried by breath clouds. The sound is warmth in another form. You realize that eating together keeps more than bodies alive. It keeps hope from freezing. A woman sets a small pot on the edge of the fire, filled with melted snow and crushed herbs. She tells you it will become tea, though not the kind you know. It tastes earthy and faintly bitter, made from juniper and birch bark. Yet it warms the throat and clears the head. Folklore says such drinks kept frostbite and melancholy at bay. Perhaps it is true. The body and spirit feed each other. Another man unwraps a strip of dried fish from a piece of wool cloth. He explains that the sea gave them food that never spoils if prepared right. Salted, dried, and smoked, it can last through a year of travel. Archaeologists have found wooden racks and fish hooks at old campsites, showing how constant this work was. Preserving food meant preserving life. Later in the day, when the sun dips again, you see them gather for another meal. This one is thicker, made from meat, grain, and cabbage stored in barrels since autumn. It bubbles slowly in a wide pot, sending steam through the air. The scent is heavy, filling every corner of the hut. The sound of boiling, the rhythm of spoons against bowls, forms a kind of winter song. One curious observation made by a historian studying Viking sagas is how often food and warmth are linked in their poetry. Words for hearth and heart-share roots in Old Norse. The idea is simple. To feed someone is to keep them alive twice, once in body, once in spirit. You see that truth written on their faces as they eat. The tired lines soften, conversation returns, and laughter ripples through the camp. After supper, a small flask of mead passes from hand to hand. The drink glows gold in the firelight. It is not enough to make anyone drunk, just enough to thaw the edges of thought. Someone begins to sing softly, and the others join in, their voices low and rough, but strangely beautiful. The song is about the sea, about warmth waiting beyond distance. You take another sip of broth, thick and salty. It coats your tongue, grounding you in this place. Each taste is a reminder that survival is built on repetition, on the simple miracle of nourishment shared. When the bowls are empty, they are cleaned with snow, wiped, and set aside for the next meal. The fire crackles, throwing light across faces that glow with faint contentment. Outside, the temperature drops again, but inside, the warmth lingers. You realize that every act of eating here is a conversation with the season. The Vikings have learned to speak fluently with hunger and cold, answering both with patience. Their diet is more than sustenance. It is a design for endurance, crafted by centuries of observation. As the men begin to settle for the night, you feel a heaviness in your limbs, not from exhaustion but from satisfaction. The stew sits warmly in your stomach, like a coal that will not go out. You understand now why their nights, though long and frozen, never felt hopeless. Inside, the fires of flesh and spirit burn together, quietly, steadily, until dawn. Darkness arrives early again, and this time it feels heavier than before. The camp glows with its small fires, pockets of light scattered under the vast black sky. The snow no longer falls, but the air remains still and cold enough to make every sound echo. You can sense that the season is deepening into its quietest part, when even time seems to hesitate. The sun barely rises now, a pale ghost circling the horizon before vanishing again. Inside the huts, the dimness is constant. Candles sputter, and the fire burns low to save fuel. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust. The faces around you are calm, yet there is a softness in their movements, a kind of slow, deliberate care. You realize the cold is not the hardest part of winter, the darkness is. The Vikings knew this kind of darkness well. In some northern settlements, daylight in winter lasted barely 4 hours. For the rest of the day, only the memory of the sun remained. Modern psychologists talk about the toll such endless dimness takes on the mind. But long before that, these people had already built defenses for it. They sang, they carved, they told stories, they lit fires for reasons that were not just practical but spiritual. A scholar once described Viking winter life as a theatre of endurance. You see it here, in how they move and speak, how they fill silence with small sounds. Each person performs their part to keep despair from creeping in. The men mend ropes or polish blades, not because they must, but because work keeps the mind upright. The women hum as they spin thread, their voices filling the space that would otherwise belong to loneliness. There is one young man sitting apart from the others, staring into the fire. His expression is distant, as if his thoughts have slipped too far inward. A woman notices, sets down her spindle, and quietly joins him. She begins to tell him a story not loudly, just enough for him to hear. It is about a fox that tricked winter itself by pretending to be asleep until spring came. The man smiles a little, then finally looks at her. You see how a simple story can pull someone back from the edge of silence. Folklore from northern Norway preserves a word for this kind of evening talk, hugmynd, meaning both imagination and comfort. It is the warmth made by minds touching. Archaeologists may never find evidence of it, but its presence is everywhere in stories that survived centuries. The fire pops softly, and a few more people gather closer. The talk grows into a quiet murmur. Some share tales of the sea, others speak of dreams they've had. The tone is not grand or heroic. It is intimate, slow, a way to remind one another that they are still alive, still part of something shared. Modern researchers who have lived through polar winters report that companionship is the most powerful defense against the depression of long darkness. The Vikings, without naming it, understood that truth perfectly. They built their communities around it. Even in their myths, loneliness is treated as a danger equal to frostbite. The gods themselves feast together in Valhalla each night to keep solitude at bay. You lean back and watch the light dance across the walls. The shadows stretch long, curling over the beams like slow-moving ghosts. The firelight gives the illusion of motion where none exists, as if the room itself is breathing. The people begin to hum again, a slow tune that fills the air like low wind through pine trees. The melody feels ancient, wordless, and soothing. A woman sprinkles crushed herbs into the fire. The scent of sage and pine fills the space, sharp and clean. She murmurs that it drives away bad dreams. The others nod, perhaps from belief, perhaps from gratitude for the smell alone. Small comforts become sacred in this kind of darkness. You notice carvings on the wooden walls, spirals, knots, small symbols scratched into the grain. They look random, but you can tell they were made deliberately. One of the men explains that each mark represents a promise: to see another sunrise, to return home, to remember someone left behind. He traces one symbol with his finger, a simple circle with a cross inside. For balance, he says quietly. Historians still discuss how Norse people managed their emotions during the endless winter. Some think they accepted melancholy as natural, a companion rather than an enemy. Their poetry reflects that tone, not despair, but reflection. The sagas are full of quiet courage, of characters who wait and endure rather than conquer. You begin to see that patience itself was their greatest skill. The room grows warmer as the night deepens. The fire burns lower, but the air stays thick with breath and sound. The stories blend into dreams. Someone laughs softly, another sighs. The dogs outside settle, their muffled barks replaced by slow breathing. The camp feels suspended, floating between waking and sleep. You think about how this shared darkness binds them. No one here faces it alone. The Vikings have built a kind of invisible fire around themselves, made not of wood or fat, but of voices, memories, and companionship. It burns just as fiercely. You close your eyes and listen. The hum continues, steady as a heartbeat. In this darkness, the mind becomes light. The silence outside is immense, but inside, the sound of living fills every space. The night may be endless, but so is human warmth, patient and unafraid. The sun returns faintly the next morning, a pale shimmer that looks more like memory than light. The snow has stopped falling, and the world outside lies quiet under a shell of frost. The camp breathes slowly, its fires burning small but steady. You walk among the huts, listening to the crunch of your boots and the low murmur of people waking. The hardest part of winter has passed, though it does not yet feel like victory. Inside one of the shelters, the smell of smoke is thicker than usual. Someone has been mending a roof hole, sealing it with pitch and wool. The light that seeps through the vent paints the room in soft gold. It falls on sleeping faces, on furs piled high, on objects that speak silently of life here. A comb, a wooden bowl, a whetstone, and beside the fire, a pile of bones neatly arranged. The evidence of existence becomes its own story. Archaeologists have pieced together much of what we know about Viking life from such small remains. A scrap of fabric burned at the edge, a layer of soot on a stone, a fragment of bone blackened by fire. These fragments whisper of the same world you see now, one built from rhythm and endurance. Every object carries a trace of hands that worked not for glory, but for the simple miracle of surviving another night. You kneel beside the fire pit, tracing its rim with your fingers. The stones are smooth from years of heat, darkened with resin and time. Inside lies ash mixed with tiny flakes of bone. In some excavated hearths, archaeologists have found the same mixture. It is thought that families sometimes buried small offerings there. Fish bones for prosperity, bits of bread for the gods of the home, a feather for luck. You imagine such gestures made here too, quietly, without ceremony, only gratitude. The bedding nearby is a tangle of straw, moss, and wool. You lift a handful and feel how it still holds warmth from the night. Beneath it lies a layer of earth blackened by use. In one corner, a discarded mitten lies stiff with frost. The shape of the hand remains pressed inside it, the imprint of a person who once waited for morning. A wooden cup sits overturned beside the hearth. You right it and find that it is carved with small symbols along the rim, faint but deliberate. The carvings form a pattern of dots and circles, maybe decorative, maybe meaningful. One historian describes such marks as private runes, reminders to the maker of stories or prayers. You run a finger over them and feel the small grooves, like a voice speaking from the past. Near the door, a shield leans against the wall, its edge cracked. The paint has faded to a dull brown, but in the light you can still see traces of red and blue. It feels strange to imagine this same shield once lifted in battle, now resting quietly beside a fire. The duality of it touches you. Life and death were never separate here. They shared the same space, as natural as breath and silence. Outside, the wind picks up again, brushing fine snow against the walls. It makes a faint whispering sound, as if calling the camp's name. You step out into the cold, blinking against the glare. The longships at the shore are half buried, their shapes softened by frost. You walk toward them, your footsteps leaving deep prints. In the distance, the sea groans beneath its frozen crust. The sound is deep and patient, a promise that movement still waits beneath stillness. A faint crack appears in the ice, running like a dark vein across the white. Spring is coming, slow but certain. You think about the traces that will remain when this camp is gone. The broken bowls, the burnt sticks, the bones buried under layers of ash. Centuries later, people will find them and wonder how anyone endured such winters. They will touch these same stones and feel the same quiet awe. The artifacts will not speak of heroes or conquests. They will speak of patience, of small acts of care repeated until they became history. One archaeologist once described Viking winter life as a conversation with the earth. You understand that now. Every log burned, every hide stitched, every bowl of stew shared was a reply to the cold, a reminder that life could answer back. You stand still for a moment, watching the smoke from the campfires rise into the clear air. It carries the scent of pine and salt, the two elements that shaped this world. The men and women who lived here are gone, yet the rhythm they created still lingers in the air, the steady pulse of heat against cold, breath against silence, life against winter. As you walk back toward the huts, a small group is gathered near the fire. Someone is telling a story, their voice rising and falling in a slow cadence. The words blur with the wind, but the tone is unmistakable. It is a story of endurance, not triumph, a reminder that survival itself can be a kind of grace. You sit with them for a while, letting the sound wash over you. The fire pops, and the air smells faintly of birch sap. The woman beside you adjusts her cloak and smiles without looking at you. You understand without words. This is what remains, what the centuries cannot erase. Warmth shared, silence filled with quiet company, the simple faith that morning will come again. The wind softens, the light brightens. Somewhere beneath the ice, the sea begins to move. The morning begins with a faint sound, a drip, then another. You step outside the hut and see the first thaw beginning. Water slides from the edges of the roofs, glistening in the weak sunlight. The air still bites at your face, but it carries a new scent, wet and earthy. It smells like soil waking up. The horizon glows faintly pink, and the sky, for the first time in weeks, looks blue instead of grey. The worst of winter has loosened its grip. Around the camp, people move slowly, as if unsure whether to believe what they see. A few men lift their faces to the light, squinting, smiling faintly. The snow crunches softer under their feet, heavy now with melt. Dogs run back and forth, barking as if they can sense the change better than any human. Inside the huts, the fires burn lower, not from neglect but from trust. The air no longer feels like an enemy. Women open the door, flaps to let the smoke drift out. For the first time in months, you can smell something other than wood and fat. The scent of pine needles, the faint sweetness of wet moss, the promise of green. The thaw within is not only in the world outside, it is in the people too. The quiet reserve that carried them through the long darkness begins to lift. They talk more, laugh more easily. You can feel it in your own chest, that stirring of relief that comes not from sudden joy but from survival realized. The long test is ending. A historian once wrote that the first day of thaw in the Viking lands must have felt like a rebirth. The words seem true. Everything moves differently now. The men scrape ice from their shields, preparing them for travel again. The women shake out blankets, beating dust and frost into the air. The sound of wooden hammers returns as huts are repaired for the coming rains. The camp hums softly, like a beehive reawakening. You walk to the shore where the longships still rest, half buried in snow. The ice around their hulls has begun to crack, the lines splitting wider with each passing hour. The sea is stirring beneath, faint and steady. You hear the low groan of movement, deep as a drumbeat. The sailors stand watching, faces lit by reflection, eyes full of quiet wonder. The ships will sail again. Inside the camp, people prepare offerings for the coming season. A woman places a piece of bread in the ashes of the hearth, murmuring words of thanks for fire and warmth. A man sprinkles salt into the snow, a gift for the sea that will soon open. These gestures are small, yet filled with reverence. Faith here is not grand or loud. It is folded into every act of daily life. You sit near the main fire, feeling the heat on your hands. Someone passes you a bowl of stew, thinner now but rich in flavor. You eat slowly, tasting every bite. It tastes of smoke and salt, of effort and endurance, of a life that refused to fade. The firelight flickers on everyone's faces, and for a moment, you see how beautiful they are in their ordinariness, people who have learned to live inside winter and come out whole. A scholar studying Viking life once wrote that the Norse people did not simply survive their environment, they belonged to it. You understand that now. The cold was not their enemy, but their teacher. It taught them the value of rhythm, of patience, of warmth shared between hands. It showed them that community, not isolation, was the only real shelter. Outside, the last icicles drop one by one, each fall sounding like a tiny bell. The sound carries through the still air, marking the slow return of life. Somewhere in the distance, a raven calls, its voice rough and proud. It feels like a sign. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with air that finally smells alive. Around you, people begin to gather belongings, checking ropes, oiling blades, tightening furs. They are not rushing. They move with the calm assurance of those who know they can face anything now. The world has tested them, and they have answered with patience and endurance. As night comes, the camp glows softer, the fires smaller, as if resting too. The stars appear, sharp and clean in the thawing sky. The wind carries a gentler sound through the trees. You sit beside the fire one last time, listening to the crackle, watching the red light shift and fade. The voices around you grow quieter. Someone hums an old melody, low and slow. The tune moves through the air like a tide, wrapping the camp in calm. The warmth against your face feels almost tender. You close your eyes and let it sink into you. For the Vikings, winter was never truly conquered. It was endured, respected, and shared. The fires they lit were small, but their light carried across centuries. You can feel it even now, this quiet defiance wrapped in stillness, this faith that life always finds its way through frost. The camp sleeps. Outside, the ice cracks again, softly, like a heartbeat returning. Dawn waits beyond the horizon, pale and sure. You draw the fur closer, take one last breath of warm air, and let the story drift to its end. Now the story softens. The fire fades to embers, and the last sounds of the camp fall into silence. You can almost feel the air cooling again, though it no longer bites. It only brushes your face lightly, like the world exhaling. The long night is behind you. The light ahead feels gentle, forgiving. You picture the Vikings as they sleep, the rhythm of their breathing deep and slow, the faint shimmer of the hearth painting their faces gold. Outside, the snow glows faintly under the moon. The dogs curl into soft shapes, their tails over their noses. Everything is still. Let yourself settle into that stillness. Feel your own breath matching theirs. The cold no longer threatens. It soothes. The wind hums softly through pine branches, carrying the smell of smoke and resin. The ground beneath you is solid, steady. Every moment of hardship has melted into calm. The fires, the laughter, the long waiting, all have become part of a single, steady memory. The Vikings did not win against winter. They learned to live inside it. So do you now. You understand the quiet pride of surviving, the strength hidden in patience. Outside, the stars linger, clear and close. The sea under its broken ice begins to move again, slow and steady, the pulse of the earth returning. The last ember glows, a small orange heart beating in the ashes. You let your eyes close, warmth wrapping around you like fur. The story ends, but the calm remains. Sleep now. The night is gentle, the cold is distant, and dawn waits quietly, ready to arrive when you are.